high school,
Okay, yeah.
there was one girl that had a sob, and it was a two-stroke.
I can do that for sure.
And it,
All right, I know Sean is not going to be here and Chris is not going to be here, so we can get started.
I'm gonna miss a meeting. I've never missed a meeting. And I'm gonna miss a meeting in November.
Okay.
Because I'm going to Hawaii.
Hawaii?
For a birthday party for a friend of mine.
It's a heck of a birthday.
Well, can we all get on board and we'll just move
So go on down there.
you're just telling that so you can brag and point out that you have a friend.
There you go. That actually is probably partially true.
No, I've been waiting to spring that on.
As to who that friend is, I may not
I said
reveal that.
something about, I was going to doing something with a friend, and so he looked at me and said, "Oh, you're just bragging.
Yeah.
You finally got a friend."
Alrighty. First on the docket tonight is our RAM resolutions. And Charlie was going to talk about that. And so I'm going to give the floor to Charlie.
Well, I've tried to, not take up a lot of time with WHAM business with this council, but I think it's important for us to spend a little bit of time talking about the resolutions that WHAM has passed. And I just want to make sure people understand the process. Basically, WHAM is a vehicle that municipalities can use to address problems that they see in the state legislature. And so each of these resolutions, as with all of the rules we have, there's a story behind every one of them. And there's a situation that a municipality found themselves in that they thought needed to be addressed legislatively. So what I'm going to do is go through them. You've had a chance to look at them, but you don't really know the stories, I don't think, that led up to the resolution being passed. Now, several of the resolutions that were proposed did not pass, and I can talk about those briefly and why. But I want to talk a little bit about the ones that did pass, and then we as a municipality then have an obligation or an opportunity to emphasize the ones that we think are most important with our own legislative agenda. And then that is part of our preparation for when we meet with our delegation, which will probably happen after the first of the year, so 3 of you won't be here, but
We'll
it'll
be
be
here
a
in
chance.
spirit.
You'll be and can certainly advise us as to what you
Don't
think we
worry
should
about
be
that,
doing.
Charlie,
So-
don't worry about that one.
So,
That won't happen.
So Dickie Shaner from Cheyenne chaired the resolutions committee, and the process is any municipality can basically say, we would like WHAM to take a position on this matter. This is a problem for us. And most of these resolutions were actually written by a council and then proposed to the resolutions committee in a draft format. And so, and then the legislative leadership committee of WHAM then has the job of trying to figure out how to deal with these resolutions and hopefully make some progress in Cheyenne. So the first one, of course, is thanks to Pinedale for hosting. That's pretty standard. And the second resolution allows the municipality to create a utility and have lien authority. So that we, and basically the problem, this was proposed by Rollins. The problem Rollins faces a problem that we all face at times, where we have someone that's run up some very significant utility bills and doesn't pay them. And the municipalities have no lien authority to deal with that problem. And so this is basically a way to collect taxpayer funds that are owed to the taxpayers by an individual or a company. And so this, and WHAM has taken a position on this and has proposed actual language to the Minerals Committee, which is meeting during the interim. And so this is on the agenda for the Minerals Committee to look at and see if they are willing, as a majority of that committee, to support a legislative initiative. And stop me anytime if there's questions about all of this. The third resolution, 18-0.
Charlie, and actually, if I had always labored under the impression that the city, for instance, if they went out and cleaned up your lot that wasn't maintained or whatever, that the city could assert a lien, and that did become a cloud on your title. Have I I've been mistaken, and I've been mistaken about a lot more things than that in the world, so don't, but,
I would have to defer to Mr. Henley on that. It said that's not actually this resolution, it's a later resolution, but it's still a question.
Oh,
we're
okay, I
asking.
thought that was
But we do, as far as cleaning up junk, taking away junk.
abating nuisances.
That we have a lien on.
Oh,
It's
okay.
kind of specified as to what the city does, as to whether you get a lien or not. So, in that case, cleaning up junk, if there's some type of a hazard we have to take care of. And actually, if the grass gets too tall, we actually can take care of that as well.
Mhm.
But
Well, or if a
it's not
building was
everything.
caving in, then you had to go tear it down to abate a nuisance. The city can assert a lien for those things.
It's a difficult lien, but you can do it, yes, a demolition.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, I'm sorry for butting in.
This is more about utility obligations and bills owed to this,
Oh,
this
okay.
particular
Okay,
resolution,
okay,
so.
okay.
So WHAM is obviously, this passed, of course, and it is something that WHAM is pursuing. Okay, this next resolution was, I'm not sure which municipality generated, but there was some frustration that there were judges who were forgiving responsibilities to pay restitution based on circumstances, and there was a proposal that that not be allowed. And several of us, myself included, basically said it's not the job of the legislature to dictate to the judges what they can or cannot do, and that they need to have the wherewithal and the latitude to deal with situations. If you have someone who's extremely mentally ill and it owes restitution, but they're never going to be able to pay it because of their limitations, I didn't feel, and the majority didn't feel like it was appropriate to say to the judges, you cannot grant leniency. So this did not pass.
Good.
So then number 4 is an important one. It basically says, with the sales tax situation now, we have to, as a group, get together with the other municipalities and the county to agree to put something before the voters as a group, okay? Well, there may be something that Mills wants that isn't relevant to us, or that's important for the county and isn't relevant to us, or something that's very important to us that isn't relevant to the other municipalities or the county. And so this would allow the municipalities then to propose to individually ask their electorate for taxing authority. And so it would, and so for example, you could go before the public and say, we want to propose a 0.25% local option tax for economic development purposes. And then it would either pass or fail, but it would only be applied to the Casper residents. And we don't have that flexibility in state law right now. So it wouldn't change anything unless something was put to a vote and passed.
Yeah, Bob.
This is especially important for Casper, since we have cities with contiguous borders that vote considerably different than we do. On 2 separate occasions, we've tried to get a library. I believe in both elections, within the city, it was passed.
I know it was, all 3 wards.
So we'd have a new library if that happened, if that had not been that way, and it would have been paid for 3 years ago.
I didn't realize that, actually.
So this is really important to us, especially when you have cities that neighbor one another.
So WHAM is working on this, and this is also being discussed by, I believe, the Corporations Committee. Okay, the next resolution, the 5th resolution, did fail. And this resolution was proposed to align our budget timelines. And basically there wasn't any support for going in this direction, so I'm just gonna pass on this one. The 6th resolution has to do with non-transient lodging. So, there has been an sales tax exemption allowed for, say, an oil worker that's staying in a motel for 30-plus days. And what some of the municipalities have found, and Rawlins in particular has found, is that a company will basically reserve a motel room for a lengthy period of time, and they'll have numerous employees go in and out of this motel, which is not really in the spirit of this exemption. And so WHAM has taken the position that we want to remove that exemption and have all people who stay at these motels basically pay their sales tax. And this is a proposal that's currently before the Joint Revenue Committee.
That also is a good one. In the early days of Gillette, before there was the lodging tax, every company that worked up there had a motel for forever, in perpetuity.
Mm-hmm. And there was no sales tax revenue.
Yeah, but there was no bed tax then either, but that
Okay.
was the early days of Gillette.
Okay. So this is another way for us to try to stabilize revenue by getting our lodging taxes.
Quick question, what changed last year before the convention? Council looked over the resolutions on what Casper would like to support in front of the WAM board, and I just don't remember doing that before Pinedale.
I think we did. Because last year we actually proposed a couple of resolutions, a year before we did.
And didn't support some of them.
Right.
They didn't get through, but
Right.
The tax on food being the major.
Right, yeah, just being a voting member for WAM
Right.
and major contributor to their
Well,
organization.
because you subbed for me that time.
Yep, right. And then in a formal meeting, we passed yea or nay for resolutions very similar to what is in our packet right here.
Okay. I just don't remember, Jesse, if we had that conversation or not. Bob says we did, I don't remember.
Gotcha.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Morgan, tonight would be one of those nights where we could take that direction if you would have it. And so, as Councilman Powell mentioned, I'm hoping to take some direction tonight that would allow myself and Ms. Martinez to create a draft legislative agenda for you to consider at a future time. And as you know, that would help prepare us for the conversation that we would have with our legislators, wherein we would say, hey, here's what we think is important to Casper. And hopefully they'd carry that water, if you will, down in Cheyenne.
Right, good.
And the next resolution is exactly that, in number 7, and that is the resolution supporting removing the exemption on sales tax on food. And we had our own discussion. I believe we unanimously voted against removing that exemption, but it remains. But it did get a majority support in the WAM membership. Because what happened is, back in 2006, when that revenue source was removed, there was a commitment from the legislature that it would be replaced through the direct distribution process. And apparently that was done for a year or maybe 2 sessions, and then it went away. And so basically from that point forward, the municipalities were deprived of that revenue and it wasn't replaced. So it's really just a question of having sufficient revenue to run the city, and we know how much trouble that has been for us over the past several years.
That was $1 million impact for us, I think, wasn't it?
I think so.
Let's tax air then too. Let's tax breathing air.
So,
Stuff you need to do. We have to eat, we have to breathe.
So did you vote for that, or were you against it?
I did say that the council was against this,
Okay.
our council.
yeah, the argument has always been that poor people don't need to pay the sales tax, but they're not paying it anyway. If you got a state credit card, you're not paying sales tax for your groceries.
Well, you need food, you need certain things to live, and it doesn't seem to be fair to tax it.
And I think WHAM would, as a group, everyone agrees with the importance of, agrees that we don't want to, but the revenue never was replaced. If it had been replaced, no problem.
You can't even protest it by not eating.
So,
So
Well-
it's an unfair tax.
But I think though that what we could do is talk to our legislators and say, you guys need to get that backfilled like it was supposed to have been from the start, and see where we can get with that. Because, yeah, sales tax on food is the most regressive form of taxation that there is. And,
So, no, I did make it clear that we were unanimously opposed to removing that exemption, but it passed anyway. And that's how it is. We
Yeah.
don't always agree in here either,
Sure.
so.
yeah.
Okay, then the next one is the one you brought up, Mike, is the lien and assessment process for abating nuisance and dangerous buildings. And, so, I'm really not clear, because there was an act, 1997 Uniform Code for the Abatement of Dangerous Buildings. And so, this, I think, is intended to clarify and make it, and simplify the process of putting a lien on properties that need to be removed or abated. And this was initially opposed by the Wyoming Bankers Association until the WAM staff met with them.
Which
because
number is that?
This is number 8.
Number 8?
And so, and this
I
was
don't
also
have it.
proposed by Rollins. And when our staff met with the banking association, they explained that we weren't necessarily trying to muscle in ahead of them in the lien process, because as you all know, people get in line with the lien process, and whoever's first gets paid first, et cetera. And so we basically said, we just want to be in the line, not necessarily at the front of the line. And once that was explained to the Bankers Association, they were fine with this.
So we did pass 8? They did pass?
8 was passed as, and WAM did approve it. So
Was
now
that
we're,
unanimously voted on?
almost all of these were unanimous. The food tax was the one that I voted against. And if you've ever been to one of these meetings, people have studied these things ad nauseum before they come before the group, and they know what they're about. And so the final vote tends to be non-controversial. And a lot of the arguments take place within the resolutions committee, like the one on removing the latitude that the judges would have as far as restitution. That argument took place within the resolutions committee. When it failed to get through the resolutions committee, then it was, really didn't have a chance with the membership. So that's kind of how that works.
Where that gets criticized, it's just another attempt by the government to take poor people's property away from them.
So, moving on to 9, in the interest of trying to keep this brief. 9 is about allowing municipalities to join the state health insurance plan. And as we all know, health insurance has been more and more difficult to fund. And so the school districts are allowed to join the state fund. And so this is an effort to try to get it, to have municipalities have that option. And that's all it would be, is an option. We have no obligation to join.
Would it be advantageous?
Well, that's for our city manager and our human resources people to tell us, I think. But this would basically give that option to the municipalities. Apparently an effort was made to do this in 2014, but there were concerns about cost to the state. And so that was being researched, and hopefully there'll be enough support to give us that option if we wanted to. And WAM is also pursuing this in, I believe this is corporations as well. Number 10 is interesting. The anti-discrimination legislation, which has been proposed at the state level. And so this is Laramie, of course, and you all know that Laramie didn't pass just a resolution, they passed an ordinance outlawing discrimination. And WAM's kind of an interesting position with this, because we have, one of our charges is to advocate for home rule. That is to give the local communities as much authority as we possibly can, so that the state isn't basically dictating to the municipalities what they can or cannot do. Here we are supporting a statewide anti-discrimination law, that would remove that authority from the municipalities and make it a state law. And so, but there were some very powerful statements made about the importance of a statewide anti-discrimination law. And most people focused on this as an economic development tool, not just a moral statement. And that would, the goal would be, of course, to say to whoever is looking at Wyoming that Wyoming is open-minded and that we will not tolerate people being discriminated against for sexual orientation or sexual preference. So that's kind of where it
That
is, and
passed.
it did pass unanimously. Now, 11 is another Laramie initiative, because they have the university, and the university, all of the university buildings are exempted from paying property tax. And so a big chunk of their town gives them no tax revenue from the property tax process. And so they are proposing that they be paid in lieu of taxes. The thing about this is, it really ends up being a tax. They're just getting paid by the state. And so,
We're all paying it. Yeah.
and then we all pay for it, correct. And so, but this is not something that WHAM has actually proposed language to one of the committees. And so I think this is really just to begin a discussion of how to be fair with a community that has that much state property. And it would affect us as well with the state office building and the other properties that the state owns. But I don't think anything's going anywhere with that session. Number 12 is the air service project, which I'm sure you've all been following. Riverton and Sheridan are the main drivers of this legislation, where basically WHAM is saying we're behind this effort to develop an air service system that is statewide and that has some predictability. So, and that passed unanimously. The next, there are several now that talk about the problem that the municipalities face, that we have also discussed numerous times, where we do not have taxing authority. And as you all know, I think from previous discussions, Wyoming, of the 50 states, Wyoming is ranked 50th in terms of the taxing authority allowed to municipalities. We are completely dependent upon the state.
Which we have none.
And we have none, and so
We
that's.
have tariffs, so.
And that's why we're 50th. So, and so this resolution, number 13, talks about that, and says that we support local taxing authority, including the authority to directly levy taxes, to control the rate of taxation, and to control the tax collection process. And this is based on the municipal finance reports that you all have copies of. There's volume 1 and volume 2 that basically describe the problems facing municipalities in terms of the funding of our basic services and the stability of our revenue sources. And so this also came from Laramie, and it also passed unanimously.
You remember at the meeting we had with our legislators who said, we don't want to give up that authority, or words to that effect.
Well, some do and some don't. Some take the position that if you want to raise taxes and take the heat, then
Go for it, yeah.
go for it. And then see how it goes when you run for office. And so there actually, there are quite a few, and it's across the political spectrum, that say, if this is something you want, we may just give that to you.
And sometimes you really don't want to get what you really want.
Well,
Because
doesn't
it
mean
probably
we-
would be your last election.
It doesn't mean you have to raise taxes.
Don't ask for it, 'cause you might get it, but
Exactly.
so I think there are probably some people that would trust the local city council dealing with raising taxes more than they would trust everybody in Cheyenne or Washington.
You know why that, I don't agree with that, you know why? Because if you were a car dealer and all of a sudden you were paying 8% in Trona County, nobody would buy a car here, they'd go to Fremont County.
So they'd all have to be licensed in their
If it
cars.
doesn't
and
work
bring
for
one.
everybody in the state, it isn't gonna work for one county, cause they'll be pricing themselves out of big purchases.
Yeah, so there's controversy, and of course, giving us the authority doesn't mean we would necessarily do it. But one of the worries is that, if they give us this, there's always this worry of bait and switch that people have about what goes on with our funding. We gave you this, so now we're gonna take away that. And what they take away may be more important than what they give. And so that's one of the worries with this process. So number 14 is one that came from us. And people say, WHAM, doesn't represent us. This was something that came to WHAM and was approved unanimously, and we were the ones who really brought this problem up, the stormwater utility problem. And no one has been as successful in creating a utility, and so this is WHAM supporting a change in the stormwater utility statutes that would essentially allow a council to create that utility. And if people didn't like that, they could certainly do it through a petition process, put it on a ballot and vote it down. And they can also unelect people that voted for it. But we all know that we're facing some major challenges, and we're just rolling the dice with this stormwater problem because people don't worry about it until after the event. And that's the problem with it. And getting people to understand that you need a robust stormwater system that will get rid of the water when it comes in large quantities is a very hard educational task. But WHAM is currently working with the Corporations Committee. This is on their agenda. Pat Sweeney is sort of carrying the water, if you will, to on this project, and there is quite a bit of movement in this direction. So we may see some results, and hopefully WHAM will help us get that done. Okay, so this next resolution, any questions on that? 15 is another Laramie statement that came to WHAM, basically saying that there are certain services that all communities need to be able to provide. And to some extent, they were speaking for the smaller communities that don't really have much sales tax revenue, and saying that we take the position that the state has a responsibility to provide some minimum level of funding to make sure that basic services are provided. And so it's really just a statement saying that there needs to be this base funding.
And the last one, where we're giving direction to the city manager, that's gonna come after
Number 15, are you talking about?
the stormwater one.
Well, I guess that's the discussion. We can have that individually as we go through these, or after I'm done. But
Is that a $25 million project for us?
the utility, the stormwater utility, well, I think we figure there's $45 million worth of work that has to be done, and we're trying to do it piecemeal over time, but it's hard when you're doing it in small chunks. So we just don't have a revenue source to
To me,
fix
it's
the system.
ironic that Cheyenne is not backing this, and in 1988, when they had the flood.
It was
They had
85.
2 elections, and they've both been beaten down
I
by the
know.
public.
I don't know.
Well, again, it's very hard to get people fired up about the need to do something when there's not a problem, because you're trying to do something well in advance. It was 85, Bob, I remember, because I had just gone down to Laramie. We had just moved to Laramie, and I still remember sitting in a park looking at this cloud to the east, and it just never went away. And it wasn't until afterwards we realized they'd had a major flood event, and it caused a lot of damage. But yeah, memories are short,
Yeah.
and that's another part of the problem. Plus, you get into this whole area of town deal. Well, I live up on a hill. Why would I vote for that? Let the people down by the river deal with it. Well,
And the real irony is some of the worst flooding was where the new Cheyenne Central High is.
well, that I didn't know. Okay.
Is any part of that stormwater thing talking about pollution abatement and runoff water? Is
I don't-
anybody worrying about that in any manner? 'Cause
Well, this is just, Mike, this is just about creating a utility, just like
Yeah.
our water utility, where people,
Yeah.
basically, we have the authority to charge
They're,
people
they're
for
they're
the
just
water they
talking
use.
about,
Goes on their water bill.
drainage capacity, not abating any pollution that's in it.
Yeah, it's basically a square footage deal. If you own this many square feet, you get charged this much because you're going to basically shed that much water into the system.
Carter had something to mention here.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Councilman Huber, I think a couple points that deserve to be mentioned with regard to thinking about whether or not this should be a priority for the city is with regard to what the numbers actually tell us. The 40 to 45 million or whatever that number ends up being is actually with regard to dealing with network extensions, if you will, and creating more capacity that we are in need of currently. The other problem, however, that this would not address, at least with regard to that number and that calculation, is in connection with infrastructure that's currently in the ground that needs replacing. That is not a part of the calculation with regard to that $40 to $45 million figure. And so if you add that to the mix, the number becomes greater. And so to me, that speaks to the profound need for a mechanism of some sort to deal with the issue at hand.
If I remember right, the models we looked at, we're talking $3 a month, something like that, ballpark, for the 45 mil.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I think that would be right, and as you all know, that would depend upon the stormwater that's actually created per property.
Right.
So a Walmart property, for example,
Yeah,
will
they're
have a
gonna
lot
pay more.
more impact
Yeah.
than an 1,800 square foot home.
So speaking of that, stormwater, what's exactly happening under that McKinley Street underpass?
What's exactly happening, Mr. Mayor,
It
Councilman
floods.
Laird, we're hoping to mitigate much of that flooding and ponding that takes place under the underpass. And so we're trying to divert much of that stormwater to other portions of the utility that can better accommodate that, as well as create better paving structure and so forth. Andrew, do you want to add anything else to that brief, probably inappropriate description?
I think that was very accurate. We're upsiding storm sewer, and you're absolutely correct. We're diverting stormwater before it even gets to the underpass in places where we can.
Is it gonna work well?
It's gonna work better than it does now.
Well, it doesn't work at all now, so.
Well, it does work.
Now we've just got a sign
Well,
we
if you
put up
could
that says
swim,
McKinley
it
Street
works.
Pool.
I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Well, and having spent my childhood at the corner of 7th and Ash, and because of the railroad grades, and of course the railroads aren't there anymore, there was always really profound pooling at Collins and Ash, Center and Collins, over by the Nicolais and that stuff. And I guess that a few weeks ago when it rained pretty hard downtown, there was some pooling down there too still. And has anything been considered about, how to take care of that problem, along Collins there at those intersections?
We are still gonna have an issue around the Nick in the library area with undersized storm sewer. We've had ponding here recently at Ash and Midwest. Just last Tuesday, you awarded the contract to Trado for the Midwest. We are upsizing a large portion of storm sewer there, which will help mitigate that problem at that location.
At Midwest, but not on the south side of the old railroad grade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll see, obviously this is gonna be a priority for us with our legislative agenda,
Mhm.
because we just, the demand for this is pretty strong.
Just real quick, I just wanted to voice, I guess, my opposition to that particular resolution that's out there. Speaking of irony earlier, we give $8 million to outside organizations, and then we ran out of 1-cent funds and didn't fund our stormwater system for fiscal year 18. So I have a problem that we're giving money outside of the city of Casper and we're not using it for ourselves. We heard from city staff that we would give $1 to $2 million year over year, and that would be adequate for infrastructure needs and maintaining what we already have. So I think it's important, should 1 cent pass, the next council make sure that the funds stay within our organization and that we focus on spending priorities. And maybe even updating our ordinance for parking lots, for example, because the parking lot requirements for businesses is huge, and you see vast empty parking lots, and then we're gonna tax them on that, where they have to abide by code. And then because of our code, they have this huge space that creates a lot of runoff. And then we're proposing that we're gonna tax them on that, so I just think it's highly unfair. In addition to, we should appropriately use the 1 cent funds for stormwater and infrastructure needs. The money's there.
And Mr. Mayor, Councilman Morgan brings up a good point with regard to some pretty difficult decisions that you're gonna have to make here coming up really soon, wherein you're gonna be hearing from a number of agencies coming forward on the 28th, and they will be making their pitch with regard to portions of that funding. And the pitch you will hear from staff will be that we need some of that funding as well for projects and so forth, maybe even relating to stormwater, certainly relating to streets and water and sewer, as well as police and fire, in that the community did speak in favor of those elements being the highest priority of the community. And again, that's fire, water, sewer, and streets and police.
And having been through this a number of times, I found that it's relatively easy to, in concept, argue against funding outside agencies until they come before you and you realize the impact of not funding.
I think we've seen that already.
It's,
Charlie, I saw
it's tough.
Ask the Catsy people.
It will, yeah, and ask, and the museum. And it will be tough. Okay, number 16. This is more of a long-term play, but WHAM is basically arguing for a recalibration of the severance and mineral royalty taxes. Those rates were set in 2000, and things have changed over the last 18 years. And so, and that cap has not increased while everything else has increased. And so, WHAM is arguing that the severance tax and the federal mineral royalties, that cap be increased from 150, that the severance tax cap be increased from 155 million to 214 million, and the federal mineral royalties be increased from 200 million to 275 million, and maintain the same allocation. Now, this is before both joint appropriations and the revenue committee, and it would, if this change if the change were successful, it would impact on not just the funding for the municipalities, but for the university, for the community colleges, for the counties, for the school districts. It would basically increase the size of the pie that's being divided up. And so I don't know how far this is going to go. Obviously, WHAM will need to partner with other agencies, but it's part of this same problem that we keep talking about over and over again, that base funding has been insecure. And one of the long-term ways to achieve security is to essentially increase the amount of money that's available through the severance tax process. Okay, number 17 also came from Rollins, and Rollins was facing some capital construction needs for their sewage treatment system. State constitution does not allow them to carry more than 4% of a debt of more than 4% of their assessed property value. And so this is an effort to actually change the state constitution so that number would be increased so that they could carry additional debt and complete these projects. And how it was set at 4%, no one seems to know.
Do you have a question, Greg?
Councilman Powell, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Do you recall if that was based upon the assessed value of the the utility itself or for the entire community? I can't remember which.
I can't answer that.
We-
Assessed taxable the assessed value of the taxable property therein. I assumed that was the entire property tax
For the community.
for the community. And again, it would just create the flexibility to do that if it were. This, number 18 did not pass. This was a Jackson proposal, and I had a little trouble following this. It had to do with solar facilities and the number of kilowatts that could be generated by these solar systems, and that there was a cap that was restricting Jackson from developing these systems. For whatever reason, it didn't get support, and I guess there's not much reason to talk about it any further, but that was something that Jackson needed, or thought they needed. Okay, so number 18 gets us back to our old topic of extraterritorial jurisdiction. Both Sheridan and Laramie proposed this. There were a lot of people within the WAM structure that were very upset with how this legislation came down. As you all know, the cities essentially have no input now regarding development beyond the municipal borders. Previous legislation allowed the cities to say, no, we're not okay with a hog farm adjacent to this subdivision outside of our city limits. Now the language basically allows counties to do pretty much whatever they want to do. And they can solicit input if they choose to, but they're under no obligation to take into account the concerns of the municipality. And so this was an effort by the city of Sheridan to make another statement that is not a good situation and that we want some of that authority restored. The sense within the WAM leadership is that the legislature is very tired of this subject. They're tired of people not being able to come up with a compromise that everyone can live with. There's been a lot of finger pointing as to whether it was the county group or the city group that wasn't wanting to cooperate. But it is what it is. And essentially, we lost any influence on development outside of our borders in the last legislative session, and the likelihood that any of that will be restored in this session is pretty close to zero. And what they're really saying, the legislators are saying, is this may have been a bad idea, but we're not going to change it before it's even implemented. We're going to implement what we passed, and if there's problems that develop, then we'll deal with it. But we're not going to change it before it's even implemented, and I could sort of understand. Okay, number 18. Okay. Apparently, in other states, municipalities collect revenue and send a portion of it to the state. In Wyoming, it's the opposite. The state collects all the revenue and gives some of it back to the cities. Okay, so this 18 was an effort to basically say, why don't you let us collect the taxes, and then we won't have to wait 2 months for you to give us our share. We'll have it and use it. And so there are a lot of concerns about doing this. It would require Walmart, or would require a vendor that works in numerous municipalities to deal with each municipality separately, as opposed to paying a single bill to the state for all of their revenue and then have the state distribute it. So this is not an interim topic. I think this is just a statement on the part of some municipalities saying they don't really like having to wait a couple months for their money, and they'd rather collect it themselves.
And charge us
but-
1%.
And
1.5%.
1.5.
Yeah.
And charges, yeah.
Sure.
So,
And that's a critical point too. thereby allowing cities and towns to keep that portion of funding that we lose to the state for that administrative oversight.
But we haven't.
But those companies like Walmart, and when I was investigating this other thing with us getting the extra tax money, these vendors who sell to different counties have to have all that segregated on their computers, so when they send the money in, it shows the sale made in Gillette on their furniture and the sale made here on their furniture. So it isn't gonna be any imposition other than what they're doing now. And we will be able to know when, if a big soda ash company wants to give us $2 million that they don't exist here in Natrona County. And that won't happen again.
Yeah, if I may, another argument, I guess, in favor of doing something like this, well, it may be a little bit inconvenient, the fuel business, all the fuel that comes out of Sinclair Refinery, you put in the destination and the refinery figures the tax. And you also have to figure your own tax as a distributor for the fuel. I mean, they may deliver fuel to Montana that has no tax at all out of this refinery, and it's routinely done. So it's not that complicated.
No, it isn't. I've seen it on their computers.
So I mean, if we could get behind this, if we want to. One of the concerns is our staff would have more work to do to collect this revenue and to disperse the revenue. So I don't know.
Well, is it a fair guess that for that 1.5% that we could afford to hire another staff person to,
So it must
to
be
keep
more than
track of that?
360,000 because we don't want to do the extra work for 360,000.
let the nice
Sorry,
man answer.
sorry, Mr. Manager. I just want to know how much extra we'll get where our staff will be willing to do the work.
Well, let the nice man answer one question at a time.
I think the state recognizes that they're making money on the deal.
Mhm.
They're more than paying for the Department of Revenue.
And they've also said that that 1% is not critical to their operations. And so there's been some move to try to get that 1%. That would be good.
Carter, do you want to answer that?
Sure, I can, Mr. Mayor, thank you, Councilman. Our friends in South Dakota do this, and the indication from our colleagues over there would say that indeed it does provide a windfall to their coffers, if you will, over and above the expenses they would incur to administer that oversight.
Thanks, that's all I'm going.
Yeah.
Now you can answer.
And fast money makes fast friends.
That's what they say.
So again, this is something where it may not be a priority for some municipalities, but maybe it's a priority for us. And we can certainly weigh in on this and say this needs to creep up the list in terms of where it stands on Wayne's
If
priorities.
that was in effect, this deal wouldn't have happened to us.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good point.
We either
That is
get a
good point.
resolution like that or we get accounting like they have up in the Midwest.
I doubt anything's gonna happen in this session with this, but it certainly can be. I mean, a lot of times these resolutions sort of initiate a conversation about something, and then it gradually works
Right.
its way into a bill that then ends up being passed. So this could be the start of that conversation. It's a pretty big change. So, and then, Resolution 21 is a resolution thanking Governor Meade for his support over the years. Governor Meade has been a tireless supporter of municipalities and counties. He has consistently talked about the importance of municipalities being adequately funded. 70% of Wyoming citizens live in a town or municipality, and Governor Meade has been a good friend. And we certainly hope that whoever succeeds him will have a similar outlook. So,
Thanks, Charlie. So I guess I just chat with Carter. He does need some direction. We may not be ready for it tonight. There's 21 resolutions in there. I think we could spend the next 3 hours debating every 21 of those. We do have speakers that are waiting for us to move forward. So I need to know what the council's pleasure is to try to give Carter direction now, or do we need to digest what Charlie had given to us and then look at doing that and giving it to him, or what do you guys think? He just wanted to be able to give him priority, or give the city
I
priority.
guess I'm ready to tell him, go ahead, give him a thumbs up on every one we've had here, because
Okay.
that's not the final word in what gets through the legislature. And by and large, that's all good for us.
With the exception of the food tax exemption. that we all
The
voted
food one is,
against.
Okay. I know Jesse had expressed some concern about stormwater, and well, I guess that was something else. But you're in support of the stormwater.
That and just the fact that we couldn't talk about it before Charlie went there to represent Casper at the convention on what Casper supports.
Any other concerns?
Well, I think there are some of these that are obviously a higher priority, and I would feel pretty comfortable that the manager can figure out which ones are a higher priority and work more on them and that. You know, but yeah, I think they all sound okay to me.
Anybody else? Okay.
Cool.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Number 2 on our docket tonight, I'll let Carter go ahead and tee that up with Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. We like to bring the sole source requests to you, if you will, in that what we would typically be suggesting is that these are purchases that we are asking for a waiver, if you will, with regard to the typical bidding process that we go through. This one is rather unique in that it is a fairly significant purchase, and it's one that the recycling facility was, for all intents and purposes, designed around. And we want to be sure that you're aware of those implications and understand the reality that that indeed we are looking for a particular piece of equipment as it relates to the baler that would be located in the recycling facility. Some of this information is not going to be new to you in that way back during the time that the discussion about the recycling facility was happening, there was probably some indication of the importance of this piece of equipment. But nonetheless, we wanted to get this information in front of you again, give you the opportunity to ask any other questions, particularly for those who weren't here during that time. And should council have direction, we would be ready to take that. Staff's recommendation is that indeed we are supported by you in the sole source request and allow us to move forward.
Didn't we approve that already?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, you certainly did approve the bid award for the construction of the municipal facility, the recycling facility. However, this is a separate component that would be built in tandem with this project and a separate purchase altogether. And so this particular purchase you have not authorized, although indirectly the design, I would say yes.
Well, physically, where will this be installed?
Mr. Mayor, do you mind if I have Mr. Beamer or Ms. Langston
bet.
address that?
'Cause and what I'm getting at is, you know, that nice big building up there that you used to back up and dump your stuff into, and then everything kind of went into a big giant compactor. At first, when I was looking at this, I thought maybe this was to get that big giant compactor working again, but no, I'm thinking I'm
Your Honor,
misunderstood.
Counsel, it's related. For 2 months now, or over 2 months, we've been expanding the baler facility. A component of that is the material recovery facility, or also known as the MRF. This baler will go in that MRF facility to recycle, to bale the recycled products. So it's gonna be adjacent to the existing balers that you are accustomed to going up to now, or you haven't been going to now, you've only been diverted to the,
Yeah. Mhm.
so it's gonna be adjacent to the existing balers.
Okay,
Has
well,
that ever been shut down?
During construction is shut down.
the existing giant compactor is gonna come back online at some point, or?
There's actually 2 of them, yes, but they will both come back online.
Yeah,
This is
okay.
an additional baler.
Mhm. Okay.
Anything else for Andrew? All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I deposited 8,000 pounds of legal documents in there a month ago, so.
Thank you for the we should tax that.
You should tax it.
Taxes. I did get taxed.
We should tax you more.
Next on the agenda is open containers downtown discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. A number of weeks ago, the council directed staff to prepare some ideas with regard to the question of whether or not an open container provision be considered on a permanent basis or a semi-permanent basis for the downtown area. And my recollection with regard to that discussion was in conjunction with some of the success that we saw when the open container waiver was initiated during the time that the eclipse activities were happening along the spine of activity in the 2nd Street corridor. If you have read the memo that the chief has prepared, you probably have an inclination with regard to what the chief's perspective is on this idea. And I would say that is reflective of what staff's opinion would be, in that we don't view a permanent or semi-permanent waiver of the open container restrictions would provide in theory. With regard to that position, I asked the chief to prepare some information that would support his logic with regard to that recommendation. And we of course would like you to ask questions and get a feel for that information. And by all means, we would need direction one way or the other if council would like staff to prepare an ordinance for formal consideration on the floor. And so with that, Mr. Mayor, if I can turn time over to the chief, that'd be great.
I appreciate the opportunity to provide some input. I come to you a creature of who I am, what my experience is. My former jurisdiction, alcohol was by far and away our number one problem, and I spent a good solid 4 years of my career focusing specifically on this, including a massive amount of peer-reviewed research that we felt were applicable. And so I'm going to try to establish a general provision with council on how I view small changes like this have a large impact on a community, and they sometimes are unintended consequences. So bear with me on that. You can imagine what it takes for a scientist to come out and be willing to make this statement on there. They got to be pretty convinced for them to be able to make a statement like this. But in my experience, I would say that there's a high correlation. Remember our statistics here locally that I reported not too long ago. 59% of everybody that we arrest is under the influence of alcohol at the time of their arrest. These things have unintended consequences, and when you start kind of focusing on them, you have unintended good consequences. So in Salinas, California, they did a 38-month program where they increased sobriety checkpoints. They dealt more consistently with the sale of alcohol to minors, and they worked on not serving people to the point of being obviously intoxicated. At the end of that program, when they ran the statistics, they found that there was a $7 million savings in traffic crashes. This is not alcohol-related traffic crashes. This is just flat-out traffic crashes diminished as a direct result of trying to focus a little bit more on some of these efforts. In Oregon, the new superintendent of the Oregon State Highway Patrol came in, did a ComStat meeting. In that first ComStat meeting, he learned that last year they did 60 minors in possession of alcohol enforcements in the entire state. Having come from a jurisdiction where that wasn't acceptable, he authorized that they go and spend a little bit more time dealing with underage party patrols and drunk driving. By the end of that first year, they've gone from 60 to 1,000 enforcements. What they weren't anticipating, however, is that when they started looking at the data, an unintended consequences was statewide that the traffic crashes reduced by 35% in that young adult and juvenile age ranges. Again, I would draw your attention to that is not alcohol-related crashes, that is just total crashes. Alcohol outlet density is something that has meaning and relevance to us. We have a pretty high ratio of alcohol outlet density, and for about a decade there's been a heavy amount of research that has gone into alcohol density. It basically describes for every neighborhood, for every business district, let's determine how many places alcohol is available in that. And then let's start comparing that to the realities that we face. Without question, they ran into an obvious link between the presence of alcohol availability in a community, in a neighborhood, in a district, in a ward, and crime. So traditionally speaking, when we talk about impacting crime in a meaningful way, one of the things that we normally talk about is when poverty exists, crime generally is more present. Most people would assume that that's a good. So in the more affluent parts of town, crime is less. Also, the rate of employment. When unemployment is severe in a community, you can anticipate more crime. Those are, generally speaking, those are very difficult for a community to address. Those are very problematic, sometimes far outside of our control. But these studies have revealed that just by doing very, very small changes in the alcohol outlet density, get some equivalent numbers. So let's take a look at those. To achieve a 1% decrease in violent crime, we could either try to increase employment by 8%, or we could try to increase everybody's household income by 4%, or we could reduce alcohol availability by just 1%. And the point I'm trying to make with this statistic is we focus on what's in the best interest, the long-term interest of the city of Casper and our citizens. And if we could, with easy decisions by this body, increase employment and increase income, we would willingly jump on that. But those are hard for us to do, but we can make changes when it comes to this. In New Orleans, a study that focused on New Orleans, the presence of just one additional alcohol outlet in a neighborhood resulted in a 24% increase in homicide. Those are real numbers, those are faces, those are people. That's a lot of information there. Essentially speaking, what we know for a fact is just a little bit of regulation on alcohol goes a long way. When you increase the tax on alcohol, that has a very strong impact just on the minor's ability to consume alcohol. A 10% increase in alcohol consumption generally will result in a significant increase in murders, in assaults, and in robberies. Now, granted, a 1% increase, not all that much, but remember, this is just a 10% increase in consumption total. But that results in a 10% increase in robbery. Barrow, Alaska is probably the hallmark of ground zero for the best data that we've ever been able to happen. So if you picture Barrow, Alaska, it's a very isolated community. You either fly into it or you don't. And so the citizens in Barrow, Alaska, back in 1993, were just flat out tired of an alcohol-based culture that was resulting in crime and violence in their communities. So the citizens initiated a citizen-born referendum to outlaw alcohol, possession, sale, transportation, or importation of alcohol in their community. It was citizen done, and it passed overwhelmingly. The alcohol industry didn't like that because they lost a captive audience, and so the alcohol industry sued over a technicality that they didn't, as I recall, it was a signature anomaly on the petition, and so it was repealed. The voters then got together and fixed the problem, reinstated it, and then in 1997, they said, you know, hey, we kind of miss our drinks, and so they reinstated alcohol. So you have this time when it was none available, back available, none available, and then back available. And so it allows for some concrete study of what happens. And so some of these things are a little bit hard to wrap our heads around, but 80%, 86% decline in felony assaults, 61% decline in fights that the police are responding to, DWI arrests dropped by 80%, suicides attempts, something that's critical to our community, down by 34%, domestic violence down by 27%. One that we didn't anticipate was school attendance skyrocketed. The absences from school was significantly impacted. Alcohol-related injuries down by 43%, and in a vague one that none of the researchers have ever defined for me, and I've actually tried to reach out to them. Harm to children declined by 32%. I assume that refers to child abuse. Now, the whole point of this is not to convince you that prohibition is what Casper is best for Casper. That is not the case. The Casper Police Department and I, as the Chief of Police, fervently, passionately believe that the lawful use of alcohol is a critical element of our community, that the ability to have events and social activities in our community and a vibrant downtown is part of the genetic makeup of this community, and without that we do not have the beautiful, exciting and vibrant community that we have. So this is not an anti-alcohol presentation. When they finally repealed it for the second time, in the first week, they had 2 deaths and 36 people admitted to or went to the ER with alcohol-related injuries, just in the first week. These are, again, I bring stuff because you can definitely make an impact with very small changes. In Norway, there was, for those of I've lived in Europe, and when they go on strike, they mean it. In Norway, there was a strike where the people that deliver alcohol, they just shut down all transportation of alcohol. And so during that 9-week strike, they estimate that alcohol consumption reduced by just 20 to 30%. During that 9-week period of time, there was a noticeable dip in domestic violence and violent crimes. So what I'm trying to convey is that small things go a long ways here. Now let's talk about Casper and why I very passionately come out against this. This is our year-to-date calls for service for persons who are intoxicated. Remember, these are not police officers driving down the road and thinking, oh, I got to go see this person. This is citizens calling in, hey, come deal with this problem. And so I blew it up on this one so that you can get a feel for it. The area that we're really advocating for, if I understand it right, is down here where we spent so much time and effort developing the old Yellowstone district and our downtown corridor in our amazing downtown. Not too far from that is kind of a bullseye situated over our city, which is the Nicolason, the library, and the gazebo, which is really a central hub of our community. These are some of the finest icons in our community. These are ones that are open to the visitors. The people are traveling through our community. They look at that. We've got several parks that kind of intersect all in that same area, along with these critical services of our main art library, our main art museum, and our library. What you see here is something that everybody in this room instantly recognizes. When you go down to the pagoda, the gazebo down there, most of you, I do not see you eating lunch down there. Now, I gathered up, unrelated to this conversation, I gathered up my 2 captains. I put them in my car and I took them down there and we did a walkthrough of that entire area. Just a little while ago, just to make sure that they understood my expectations, that this is part of our community. This is what visitors to our community see, and our reputation is impacted by small things. But this is definitely an area that most of you would say, you know, I don't think I want to take my grandkids and sit at that under that gazebo and eat our lunch there, and that's a crying shame. The mood or the attitude, the recommendation from the police department, as this topic was discussed in my police department, was uniformly centered on and unanimously, we do not want to extend the grief that comes from that. This is from our body cams that we're testing out. I was there not too long ago. I chose this picture because I was trying to find one that kind of showed the debris, but it also shows the fact that I was there just a week before this picture was taken from one of our body cams where this picnic table was not damaged. But the sheer volume of cigarette butts over against the curb, there's an actual windblown drift of cigarette butts and other debris. The garbage can that's not quite in the photo here is filled with alcohol containers and surreptitious alcohol containers, the Gatorade bottles and other things that had the original contents removed and were now smelled of alcohol. To not put too fine a point on what I'm trying to emphasize here is that this seems an unobtrusive still shot from our body cam. But this gentleman right here, who is not visible to us today, he's pointing. And I froze it here because we had just asked him the question, where are you going to the bathroom? And his response when I froze this is that behind that bush over there. And this is why I'm trying to not extend throughout a greater area of our city the open container allowances within the city. I would advocate to you that the street inebriate population would immediately recognize and take advantage of that proposition. There are ways to mitigate it through specified alcoholic containers, things of that nature. However, they are an ingenious people that have developed an entire lifestyle around facilitating their alcohol abuse and chronic alcoholism, and so they're the quickest ones to find loopholes. They're not opposed to finding a thrown away container. They're not opposed to retaping on a wristband. You know, and right now they're kind of isolated in a small section of our city that we're trying to get a better control over. What we're advocating for is we don't extend that area out. In conclusion, then I'll absolutely open it up for questions. We have no problem whatsoever for event-specific circumstances, similar to the eclipse was a wonderful success. I would just remind you that for the eclipse to be a wonderful success, months and months of planning, budgeting, and strategic thought process went into making that a success. What we would advocate for is that we keep it just exactly for that, for special occasions. But if we start saying, you know, every Thursday night, every Friday night, every Saturday night, things of that nature, we were going to advocate for the people that make it not enjoyable to kind of migrate into that area of town and diminish the experience of the people that are there to enjoy that beautiful part of town that we've worked so hard to develop. It's our opinion that these minimal kind of precautions will kind of mitigate the adverse impact of this. So if we kind of reserve it for the big events that is appropriate, but not extend it to so frequently that we just become a Thursday night, you know, it's you know, for the Rock the Block or the crawl or any of the other things that are going on, that becomes problematic. Remember how many officers we had on scene during the eclipse to kind of keep things on the even kill. We're not staffed for that on every weekend. I'm not budgeted for that. So if we are going to advocate, you know, if we do it for special events that I can know long in advance, then I can budget and I can plan for that, and we can accommodate that. But to have it to change our community into one where we provide them the legal impetus to say, hey, it's open containers here, you cannot, you know, I have every right to drink in this area of town, would be not in our best interest of developing our downtown district, the areas that we spent so much time on. With that, I open it up to questions.
Okay, I got Dallas and I got Jesse.
A couple questions I've
You
got.
bet.
I'm so happy that you brought that area up, because one of the things I wanted to talk about to you was the problems that are down there. Now, I go down there a lot and check it out with my dog, 2-3 different times a day. I'll go by it at night, but I don't see a police presence down there. Not saying there isn't one, but I wish there was more of one, and so do the people that have businesses and time down there. Now, one of the things you didn't mention about that situation is those are homeless people, primarily in that area, because they're sleeping out at night. Last night, I talked to several of them, and they were scouting out an area in a building that my son is trying to turn a business into, and they all slept in that particular area. We were just asking them not to do that anymore. So you've got a big homeless problem down there, and if you can figure out a way to clean that up, I'll be so happy. Secondly, Barrow, Alaska. That town, though, do you know what primarily the ethnicity group in that town is? It's American Indians. And so when
The
they
native population is the ones that are the main customers were in fact the oil field industry
Well,
employees that are there.
I'm sure that's true to some extent. Now, I like the way you're looking at this. Now, the only thing I say about this, you know, I showed you the email I got from the mayor of Sheridan. He thinks theirs works. Now, I have been up there to that, and what they do is it's, I don't know how many times a year it is. It can't be 4 or 5 times a year at the most. And they cordon the area off. They cordon this section of Main Street off, and they have vendors come in there that make beer and all of that, and they serve beer down there. He thinks that theirs works. I don't think that kind of thing they're doing is what we're talking about in the area that I wish you'd clean up. Personally, my opinion. And I don't know how I'm gonna vote on this. I think there's a segment of our society that's there are people that can handle this and be respectful of it and can run it in such a way that it's controlled. I think it's more a consumption problem than where you're buying this alcohol in many ways. But that problem with the gazebo, chief, I wish you'd get 10 guys and go clean it up tonight.
So if I could, Mr. Mayor, if I could just respond to that real quick. If you haven't seen police officers down there, it's because you just haven't seen them, because there has been a high degree of attention focused on that. It's even got to the point where we were getting very conscious about the number of people that we were taking to jail. And so I have great footage of my officers going there and very creatively getting everybody together. Hey, we have an option here. We can do some enforcement, or you can all fill this garbage bag. And they dutifully went around and kind of cleaned up the debris. So we've been pretty creative about it, and there has been a high degree of attention since I brought it to my staff's
Can you make it a
attention.
higher degree for me? I'm only kidding, chief, but I do think it is a serious problem down there. It's a very serious problem.
So again, what we're advocating is without some significant safeguards, that problem that you have there migrates into the areas where you don't want it to migrate. So that's the message I'm trying to bring.
Go ahead, Jesse.
Thanks, Dallas, and thanks, Chief, for the presentation, and then also responding to Dallas's concern, because it's always frustrating to hear. We already know about a problem, but what are we doing to try to fix that? So I appreciate your proactive approach to that. And basically, what I'm after here is that common sense approach that our interim police chief had, and that was a street closure over here. So imagine this is Ash Street. There's David Street Station on this side. There's Rocker Block, Yellowstone Garage on this side. And basically, there's a street closure there, one there. They each have their own malt beverage license. The only problem is, as soon as you step onto that sidewalk and then cross the street, it's all of a sudden illegal. So, what he was able to do was just look at that right there and say, what's the harm in this person carrying this beverage from there to there? And that's basically what I'm getting after here. There's a number of street closures that take place for particular events in the summer months, such as Rock the Block, Art Walk, and then of course David Street Station always has something going on. And just the freedom to move freely across a street to the next street closure. There's even street closures in front of Fox and Branding Iron for, I can't remember what, all the street vendors anyways go there, and then there's 3-on-3 basketball and things like that. So that's all I'm looking for right here, and from council is to just look at some of those events that are planned throughout the entire year that are no surprise to us, and then being able to say that it's okay for you to go from this event to the next event. There's malt beverage license already, permits already allowed for each of those events, and the people there, I don't see any of them getting arrested. I go to the majority of events at David Street Station, I don't see any issues. Go to Rock the Block all the time, no issues. I go to the Windy Wednesday Food Truck Festival that always has a small beer truck there. Never any issues. We even took it upon ourselves to have our national night out at David Street Station for the farmers market, where you're able to walk freely throughout David Street Station, buy some fresh produce, thank a police officer, and walk around with a beer in your hand without an issue. So I don't see it as that big of a problem, and that's the approach that I'd like to take, is for those events that are planned out for the entire year in the summer months, and only allowing it for a certain period of time that we can also dictate.
Go ahead, Chief.
So if I could just respond to that again, when you say common sense approach, and again for special events, when we're adequately staffed to do that and we've prepared for it, that's not what I'm concerned about. It's when we make it routine. So without maligning a segment of our population, and without sounding horrible, I'm going to try to choose my words carefully here. The common street inebriate is perhaps one of the most trainable creatures that exists. They absolutely very quickly learn where they can and cannot be, and so my only concern is that when it becomes frequent, the same person that is right now keeping you from wanting to take your family to eat lunch under the gazebo will now go to David Street Station, and because they will look for the opportunity to take care, to be able to facilitate their lifestyle without police intervention. They will seize that opportunity, and it begins to detract from the overall experience that you enjoy so much. And that's our concern, that's our prediction, that it won't take them too long. Right now, where we've done that a few times, that's not enough for them to become habituated to, this is great, here we go. And so that's our concern.
So, just to clarify, thank you. So we already require that they have to have security for these big events. So would we be taking away from that, and then we have our own police officers be the security instead of forcing that for the people that are pulling the permit?
So I don't, Mayor, Council, and I don't know how to answer that because we haven't got to that point. When it comes to those big major events, those require a large police presence, and something that we plan for and budgeted for. These weekly events, that don't involve a high degree of alcohol consumption and that transient nature, so far we haven't felt the need to do that. Their private securities are up to that. But what you haven't seen is the migration of a known problem that seeks to take it, because they're somewhat unpredictable at this point. But if we make it more common and more frequent, or we make it the rule rather than the exception, you lose that advantage.
So, just one
You
more,
bet.
if you don't mind. What about, so the main goal that I want is just walkability, not being stuck at one event. People want to enjoy themselves, they want to enjoy other parts of downtown, and just have that different atmosphere that downtown businesses are able to provide. Is it possible to actually have it tailored to the point of you're walking from one event to the other event, whereas as long as you, basically this is my yellow brick road that I'm allowed to stay on from here to there.
So, Mayor, Councilman, we're here to receive direction from you, and so if that's the direction you want to go, then we do that. Is it possible to allow this to happen? Absolutely. my presentation tonight has been more along the lines of these things have consequences. So the fact that we don't have trouble at David Street Station, when people are walking around, generally speaking, that's the ones that are not our common troublemakers. But in my experience, and the research will back me up on this, that trouble manifests later on. So the domestic violence that occurs that night, things of that nature. My presentation tonight has been more along the lines of, you know, if we put in reasonable common sense efforts to control the unlawful or improper use of alcohol, communities benefit, they thrive, they prosper. If you remove simple ones, it has a lasting impact. And so, although right now we don't have problems, I would like to keep it that way. That's what I'm aiming for. But nonetheless, we're here to receive direction from you guys. I've provided information that I just want you to consider, and I appreciate the opportunity to provide it.
Carter had a real quick question for Mr. Reed, actually.
Mr. Reed, thanks for being here tonight. Do you mind if I pose a question to you?
You do mind? The illustrious former mayor of Casper.
The illustrious former Mayor Reed. Yes, thank you.
Former Mayor Reed.
You never lived that down.
If indeed you were selected to cater an event outdoors, and if it's Rock the Block or if it's one of the other many events that take place, how would your industry feel about people bringing alcohol from another event into your event that you have exclusive, if you will, pouring rights for that particular evening?
And of course, you'll get varied opinions on this from alcohol dealers. Mine is probably a little strict. Mine focuses more on the insurance issue that I have when I go out and do an event. I pay a special amount to take my liquor liability to that spot, and that I'm responsible for every drop of alcohol on that spot. And when somebody comes from another event with alcohol and comes into my place, whose problem is it if there's an issue when that person leaves? Maybe they didn't have a drink in my place. Maybe they got drunk here. That's always been my issue. So if I do an event, I don't allow it to come in. I really don't. And it doesn't make people happy at times. And I don't allow them to leave with it. And that doesn't make people happy. But quite honestly, if we pull an open container permit, we're supposed to be in a specific area. So we shouldn't let them out of that. I mean, that's it. It's a cool idea, Jesse, and I've seen it. Excuse me, Councilman Lord, Your Honor. It's a cool idea to be able to walk between places, and it worked really well at the Eclipse. But I'll tell you, one reason it worked really well is because they figured out after the first day they couldn't police it. I mean, there were many of us, and we were all sitting there throwing our hands up going, phew, this is a mess. And all of a sudden your licensing specialist came down and said, time out. They can walk wherever they want to. But if you walked up the street a block from where we were pouring alcohol, here was the sheriff and police SWAT team standing on the corner. And as you walked further up the street, there were more officers. So it worked real well during the Eclipse because it was planned. But I don't like it. And I'm just here to listen tonight. Personally, I don't like it.
We have Kneen, Bob, Mike, and Dallas.
It's a great presentation. The Nick Fest was an eye-opener for the homeless population, and I guess that's what happens when we have the homeless center downtown. Well thought out, support you 100%. This is, I don't know if we, behind you 100%, bad idea.
What
Works
did you
for
see
me.
at the Nick Fest? I wasn't there.
There were homeless people playing in the water fountain that we had out there, and it was kind of embarrassing.
Where they congregate.
No, I knew that.
Oh, I didn't see
Not affected
It just,
the Nick Fest.
I didn't realize it was a problem, but it was an eye-opener.
Glitch.
So if I can just, thank you for the support. Mayor, council. I just wanted to point out, we've several times the word homeless person has come up, and I use the word street inebriate. Oftentimes, the street inebriate has a home, has a family, has a support network. They willingly choose the lifestyle that they're at. So it's not fair to say that they're all homeless. Many of them are, but many of them are homeless by choice, because they're facilitating a lifestyle that makes them not welcome at their home. And at the Nick Fest, the night before, we took people out of the bushes that were fornicating. We had people clean up some feces, and before that, so the police department was out there trying to prepare for the Nick Fest.
Well, it's been a rough year, so it's pretty hard to say, let's go police alcohol lines when I feel like we have bigger stuff going on.
Mike, did you want to say something?
Well, one other quick question if I could, or a quick comment if I could. In the area where I'm at, when we first built our building down there, we had a significant street inebriate problem. Some of them were homeless, some of them weren't. Since you built the Nick area up in the gazebo and David Street Station, that problem for me has went down probably 75%.
You're welcome.
So I will tell you, I agree with the chief that a lot of this is things that they do to themselves, and build it and they will come.
Bob. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief, I kind of support the position we don't need to do any more open container stuff. And I'll tell you why. I live just about 150 feet from the gazebo.
135.
Whatever. I'll take your word for it. So anyway, I can sit on my front porch and I can watch what transpires down there, and I do that in the summer. And quite honestly, the PD does show up a lot down there. That and the library both, and they're so closely related that they're there. I don't clean up leaves but about once or twice a year, but I do have to clean my yard about once or twice a week and pick up bottles out of my front yard. You can check into Shine Frontier Days in the early 70s, up until about the early 70s. They used to have open container along 16th Street for about 6 or 8 blocks. I don't believe they do that anymore. And it just got out of hand. I mean, you'd see what you knew were 12 and 13-year-old kids, drunk and skunk in the middle of the streets in Cheyenne. It was not a good idea, and they don't do it anymore.
It was fun.
Pardon?
It was fun when I did.
Whatever.
I was 15.
Well, I just don't think
Alice,
it's...
you do not help when you make comments like that.
That was about 100 years ago, though, Chief.
Go ahead, Bob.
Well, anyway, another thing that's really different about the way people drink in the U.S. and the way they drink in Europe. I know a lot of you have been to Europe, and I've been to downtown Madrid, in the biggest square in Madrid. And that square is about, I would say it's about 4 blocks on a side, our blocks. Around that thing is every kind of imaginable restaurant, top of bar. There's one thing they do different though. They serve everything in glass. And the owner doesn't like to lose glasses. Because if you walk outside of his building, he drops it, it's gone. And they also have to stand to drink. So, just 2 things that are way different in how it's done over there. And you can walk anywhere in that, I mean, it's from, usually the party ends about maybe 4 or 5 in the morning, and then people walk home. I mean, it goes on pretty much from siesta time in the afternoon till about 4 o'clock in the morning. You can walk anywhere in that big mall. It's not a mall, it's just an open plaza. And people do not carry drinks. They don't need to do that to have a good time. So.
Mike.
Well, Chief, first I want to thank you for your presentation. You have a lot of good facts there and everything. But I think, though, that we're talking about a variety of different things here. Casper has a quote homeless problem. There's no question about that. And I think that segment kind of is headquartered, if you will, in the Park Street, Kimball Street, kind of in that area. And I think that that's just gonna be that way, you know. I mean, I remember when we had our hotel at 201 North Durbin Street, you know, that neighborhood just kinda, and that was a long time ago, but that neighborhood just kind of attracts that kind of thing. One of the things, Mike, over there in your neighborhood, I think you in your business have gone a long ways in really helping to improve that neighborhood, and just the surrounding properties have really cleaned up a lot since you know, since you guys have been there, and I really compliment you for that. I think that when we talk about these kind of things, what we need to think about is, you know, you can look at it one or two different ways. One, you could look at it that, well, okay, you know, we're going to sort of presume that there are going to be problems and there are going to be problem people, or we can presume that there, you know, that it can be done in a positive and law-abiding way. And I kind of prefer to look at it that, you know, let's try to not just put a positive spin on these things, but try to set things up in a way that will set up the presumption that it will not be a problem kind of a thing. You know, like one of the things that you mentioned, you know, okay, if you have a permit to operate on this block, let's say, or in, you know, in this area, that's, I see a real big problem that, you know, okay, if somebody comes from Frontier Brewing or the Wonder Bar or from somewhere else carrying one of their things, and they walk into the area that you have in essence rented or something, you know, all of a sudden we're taking away his, it'd be just like if I went over to a different bar and walked into your place, well, here, I want to sit here and drink this that I bought up the street. No, that's not something that's going to work. And I think that when we work on fashioning something about this, we're going to have to try to figure out a way to work those kind of things. The other question that I would have, Chief, that I would sort of pose to both you and to Mr. Reed, the problem inebriate that you talk about, you know, my best guess is that that's not somebody that has bought their alcohol by the drink from a responsible operator, but that's probably somebody that, you know, got a bottle of Ripple or you know, and something, and I don't mean to be stereotypical typecasting people, but I would be interested in your guys' perspective on that. If you think, are these people that bought that by the drink, or are they people that bought a bottle and had it in that paper bag and, you know, served themselves?
Quick, Chief.
So I, you know, if I can address that real quick,
Mhm.
I would agree with you that the street inebriate tends to buy in bulk. If you were to go to the gazebo right now, go to the couple of 55-gallon drums that we have there and check out the containers that are in that, you will see that they have transferred the contents from an alcohol container to a more benign container, as if we're somehow fooled by that. But so yeah, they do tend to buy it in bulk. What, you know, again, my message is more of, if you provide them the impetus to go someplace where the police will have no hooks on them for that activity, they will seize that opportunity. And then if I can just address, you made an earlier comment about our environmental design of our community. When we make improvements to the community, you know, look at and I'm not even from here, but you know, stories of the sandbar exist, you know, and the changes that are, you know, we are a better community now because we kind of developed that area that we are currently meeting in today. And my strong, passionate plea to you would be that we have spent a great deal of time and effort in a wide variety of other groups and organizations to develop the old Yellowstone district and our 2nd Street area, and you know, we have this vibrant downtown. It'd be a crying shame to reintroduce problems unnecessarily into it.
Mr. Mayor, do you have anything that you want to add about that?
Well, I think the people that the chief is talking about do buy in bulk. Sometimes it's small bulk, but you know, they wind up having a bottle with them, and all of a sudden they're pouring that with their friends at an event. You know, if they start, you know, you like your splash pond last thing you want's a few of those guys down there taking a bath in your splash pond late at night. I think it's an issue that you need to address, but I like all the events that are going on. I just think if you keep them under control rather than making them wide open, I think you're better off. Because alcohol's an issue in this community. I mean, I sell it, I appreciate it, I do it wisely, but not everybody does.
Mr. Mayor, just one other thing. I was so excited seeing a Mike Reed sign in front of your business some time back. Can't imagine where that might have come from.
I wish I knew. I can tell you this, they either loved me or hated me because that sign is perfect condition. And it's a sign from 1988.
I wouldn't begin to know who might have
Yeah, I do.
been a
I
part
know
of
I
that.
do. That's exactly
Dallas.
Chief, I see two problems. And I see the biggest of the two problems you've talked about is the issue down by the Nick. And I agree with you. The bottles I see that are down there and broken that I pick up and put in the trash because I don't want my little dog stepping on them, are people that have bought fifths and quarts and pints. And then I've seen the mixing bottle and all of that. So I'm so happy that you're addressing that issue. One of the things that, with the guy pointing at the bush, the other thing, the big bathroom they use is at the library. And I don't know how to solve that, but people go in and out of that library and then they drive through the parking lots, endangering people. That's a big deal right now, where they start over on Walcott and they drive through the parking lot by Stratton and then over by the library, and sometimes they drive not so well. So you have, the other issue there is the bus station, where everybody, all of those people congregate, and they all sit around that gazebo, and you're right, nobody would go in there, generally speaking, and have lunch, because they're sitting on the property. Some of them have unleashed dogs, and you know, I have a soft spot in my heart for homeless people, especially the people that have some mental issue, and just can't seem to get it shaken. And I do. I try to talk to all of them, just kind of see what's going on and where they're living, and then where they find places to live. And so that's the big problem for this community to solve. And I don't know how you change that over there without changing the bus routes and without doing something with that bathroom in the library. And I think there needs to be cameras down there, because last night when I walked, there was, in my opinion, a drug transaction going on there, and you should have seen them duck in the bushes when they saw me and my dog, because I think now they kind of know who I am. And sometimes I remind them there may be cameras around there, and they turn around and leave, but that's a problem down there. And I think it's, and it's interesting the way you said that this could migrate, because this lady who's very dear to me, last night I asked her about this, and she says, well, Dallas, if you guys do that, those people are gonna migrate down and drink at these other areas. And I thought, where did you get that idea? And then I hear you saying it, because it was something I didn't think about. But I do know we have a great police force that can take care of certain things if we only do it 3 or 4 times a year. Because when I came down to talk about this alcohol deal, I was thinking 3 or 4, or maybe at most 5 times in a 4 or 5 month period is what I was thinking, not any everyday sort of thing like that. And so, but this area down there, it's gonna take a lot of thinking on how you're gonna clean that up, because by golly, it needs to be done. But I feel sorry for those people, because many of them don't have a family, don't have a house, don't have a money, and I see them sleeping at night. I'm down there, they're sleeping on the park benches. In the dead of winter, they were sleeping on the park benches, because I go down there in the dead of winter too, and I've gotten very familiar with that. So I think it's incumbent on this city and this council to get behind you 100% on taking care of that area. I think the carrying of a drink by Jesse and his friends and folks like that from one place to another, I don't see that as a big deal 4 or 5 times a year. I just don't. But I'm hearing what you're saying and how you're blending that in, and what she told me last night about, well, they're just gonna come down there with their own drink and they're gonna pour it in a glass and they're gonna be down there drinking. I feel so sorry for those people. I don't know what we can do for them, but it's a bigger problem than you think, because I'm being told there's over 1,000 homeless people in Casper, Wyoming.
So what I would tell you is we have wonderful services for the homeless population, especially during the winter. A great deal of effort goes into facilitating a safe place for them to sleep. It has been my experience through now 27 years of law enforcement and communities that have an issue, that you know, a street inebriate will frequently tell you they're homeless when in fact that's, you know, that they don't have family, they don't have, but that's not true. When we get them and we interview them, we start finding out their resources. We start contacting their relatives. Hey, you know, trying to find a way out for them as individuals. You know, in my experience, you know, my officers, we find out if they're veterans, because if they're veterans, they have rights to VA treatment, and we try to steer them in the right direction so that they can change that lifestyle. So the ones that choose to sleep on the bench in the park during the winter in Casper are ones that they are advocating making their own individual choice of the alcohol is more important because the shelter doesn't want them if they're intoxicated, and so they will willingly undergo that exposure to facilitate that. So, you know, there are homeless, there are bona fide homeless, and especially those that have mental illness.
Well, the bus depot down there, Chief, I don't know how you're gonna handle that one, because that is a big congregation area. I don't know if you've gone down or ridden those buses in your plain clothes, but you'll find out that they hang around down there and they're waiting to get into that library bathroom. And that's where that hangout deal starts, and then they're going up and down those streets.
So I do want to stay focused with our open container discussion. I know we're kind of delving into the homelessness issue right now, and I know we've got a couple other people that still need to talk, and so I wanted to stay focused on there. I didn't know if you had you wanted to answer any of that, Chief, to what Dallas just said.
It seems to me like this is going to be an ongoing discussion. I'll be more than, you know, the police department is absolutely committed to helping our citizens, whether or not they're affluent citizens or poverty-stricken citizens. We're committed to helping all of our citizens in their time of need, and we are making a presence known in an area that I consider to be the heart of our city. You know, that our visitors and our citizens, that the fact that that's the central bus station is not lost on us. That people that are riding the buses got to transfer there. That's the transfer location. So we're acutely aware of, and we're making our presence known. But at the same time, we're working not to be. We do not want to give the impression that we're providing disparate attention to people that are somewhat vulnerable. And so we're working more on being creative of how to solve these problems without going in with a strong arm and just wreaking havoc in that population.
Jesse and Charlie had
And
comments
Mr.
too.
Mayor, just a comment to you, I believe that is a far, far bigger problem for the city to solve than this little open container deal.
I'm on your side
Because
on
I
that.
think that we're gonna follow the advice of the city staff, at least I am, on this open container, even though I think we should let people do it from time to time.
No, I'm on
This
with
other
the
problem
homelessness.
is the tip of the iceberg problem,
I want
and
to
it's
with that.
getting worse.
Yeah. Jesse and Charlie had a comment.
Yeah, sure. Final point that I'll make to council is it's only for particular events. The thing that I have a problem with is our ordinances that are on the books and they're not being enforced. You have people that are already walking with an open container, and there's permits that are pulled every Tuesday for the farmers market, for example. So these highly trainable and adaptable individuals aren't taking advantage of what's already there. There's already an open container allowed in front of Frontier, in front of David Street Station, in front of Rock the Block. That is already taking place. I'm not seeing any of this doomsday type scenarios taking place down there currently, and it's been going on all year long. So the only thing I'm trying to get after is when there's a street closure right next to each other, that you can walk freely from this side of the room to that side of the room, because that's about how long the street is, and that's where the street closure is. So I do respect the concerns with that. I just don't think it's the reality of people that are taking advantage of having a nice time outside at David Street Station where there's no open container allowed or rocky block under the same circumstances. Now I could have to look at that further under Mr. Reed's concerns with that, which is an interesting point. But that's all I'm trying to get is, you know, we're barely enforcing some of the issues that are taking place down there. Jaywalking, that's not allowed downtown, and people do it all the time, so why is it there?
Good, Charlie.
Well, I obviously share all the concerns about the homeless population. I do think we're trying, but there is a group of people that have a very serious addiction problem, and that is the most important part in their life, is feeding that addiction. And every community has that subpopulation. And I understand your concerns, Chief, although I agree with Jesse that it seems to me Rock and Block's been going on for 2 years now, and you know, maybe I don't stay up late enough, but I haven't seen any evidence of people being inebriated and out of control at those events. And so they're well understood. Seems if that's what they do is migrate to those events, they would already be there. So I mean, I share the concerns. I mean, I go down there and have a beer, and I guess I don't pay as close attention to where I'm walking around. Maybe I've been in violation of the open container ordinance, just going from point A to point B, but I'd like to think there is some way for us to come up with a compromise. I'm not aware of what Sheridan has done. I'd be curious to learn a little bit about that.
I sent you the email.
Yeah, I missed it, so I don't know when you sent it, but anyway, I guess I would like to not advocate for a change this evening because we have other things to do, but I also don't want to close the door on the possibility of what Jesse is suggesting, that is, that there be a more relaxed atmosphere, and maybe put a time limit on it and say it's only an open container situation until 9:30 at night. I don't know, but I don't want to close the door on it. I understand what you're saying, Chief, but I do think that we did do well during the eclipse, and it was an open situation. And I don't think that we did well just because there was a lot of enforcement people. I think that we did well because there was an atmosphere of enjoyment without people going downtown to get drunk. So I just think they're separate issues, and I think we should keep an open mind, and maybe we can find a way to work out a compromise.
And I just read a couple.
Not tonight.
No, but I sent it to you.
When did you send it?
I just sent you another.
Oh, okay, all right. I don't have time to look at emails today, so.
Do you want to ask Burke a question really quick?
A couple of you mentioned some event-related kinds of insights and so forth, and I think that's important for me as a segue into the notion that indeed we're going to be bringing forward an event guide that tries to memorialize some of the relationships that we're trying to establish with those who conduct events. We have with us an event expert here this evening, and if you had some insight, Ms. Kaufman, that would help us understand things that we might be able to do as an organization that would better facilitate events that you oversee, I'd be interested in that feedback.
Well, I think our biggest challenge is probably actually getting the permits, no matter how often they're issued or not. But that aside, Mike, I really respect what you brought to the conversation. I think those are things we don't think about. What I would ask the council to consider, and I'm so proud of our city, you guys just did an amazing job during the Eclipse Festival. All of you were there, I think minus the new council member. And it was so well done, and it was elegant, and it was just it was a good face for our city. So I have to believe that there's a solution that addresses or gives the chief and helps meet his concerns. You know, Mike, you brought up some good points, but that somehow during the eclipse there was a flow. We obviously have a quality of life and a tourism interest where we want things going on in our city that, you know, drive lift and visitor economy and economic impact. So I have to believe there is a solution. And for us, our biggest challenge is how do we move still through this process to get what we need to be able to create things that do drive events forward. So that's our biggest challenge. But if you create a task force or a small subcommittee, I would love to have a voice on that. And maybe, you know, Mike or the caterers too, however that works. But I would love to be a participant in that because it is important. I think our residents want it, some level of this. Thank you.
So I don't think we'll do a, kind of per what Charlie was saying, maybe not give a direction tonight, and we can move forward, but I do agree, I think there can be a compromise somewhere where we can make that, addressing those concerns with the chief. But I do agree with the fact that, something that's not long-term all the time or anything like that, but something that does help us with those, like Brooke was just saying, the times that we're enjoying ourselves and go out there and do that responsibly, but not overwhelm our police department or any other issues that come up.
Sheridan's is every 3 weeks.
Okay.
That's what they say. And the mayor would like you to call him. He'd be happy to explain it to you.
Which mayor is that?
Sure.
The one in Sheridan.
Isn't Mayor Miller?
Uh,
He's the mayor.
Okay. Next, restorative justice. Thanks.
City administrator is Mark Collins. Senator Kinsky's the one that sent me the email.
Used to be the mayor. Yeah, Senator Kinsky. Okay.
He said that they have certain criteria for best practices for large events where alcohol is sold, and that they would be willing to share all that.
Perfect. Thank you.
I mean, they've been doing it for a while, so they're gonna have some. This other thing is more important in my opinion, about how to clean this area.
Agree.
Chief, when I was 16, I used to go down to Frontier Days, and that was in 1963.
Jen, I think we're taking 2 seconds. You guys are grabbing some stuff here, so thank you.
There were 2 bars, the Mayflower and the Bluebird. And if you had 50 cents, you were tall enough to slap it on the bar, you got a beer. And the reason it quit is the Mayflower burned down, and the Bluebird was sold. And then everybody grew up, and it got 50 years later, so they don't do that anymore.
So Dallas, I can talk for hours on underage alcohol. That I am very proficient at.
In your social group. I don't know anybody who didn't drink underage from where I can go
Some of them did.
Some of them did.
One or two didn't. One or two didn't. So,
And I don't enjoy being
Well,
Did you not, Julie? Did you not? I've not and I've been involved with building up a ability to help
I think it does all
severe addictions, fortunately,
Jen, you're so patient.
What's that?
You're so patient.
I think I know why the whole Eclipse thing loosened up. Because I got a beer at the Yellowstone Garage, and everybody was walking everywhere, and I'm walking around with my beer, and there I am, second and center, and I run into Scott Jones. He's in uniform. He never said a word, and I never said a word. But he knew and I knew that I was not supposed to have that beer at second to center.
yeah, but you know, one of the things, one of the very first Eclipse-a-thon planning meetings I went to with fire I think it was Kenny King, or someone at the fire department, had contacted a couple of cities that had been impacted by eclipses before. And what they were told was, it's not going to be like a rock concert, because the people that are going to come are going to be geeky, generally older, mature people that are sort of geeky, science-minded, and they're going to want to look at that. They're not there. It's not like a rock concert. It's not this. It's just a different climate. They said what you can expect is that you can expect impacts on your traffic, impacts on your hospital because geeky older people tend to have heart attacks and all that kind of stuff. Those are the things that you can expect, and if you don't have some outside catastrophe that happens to happen when you've got this influx of people, generally it's not going to be a problem. And yeah, there was a lot of planning and a lot of presence and all that stuff. But I think that that was just a very unique event. But if you can kind of, what I didn't express real well earlier was that if you can create that atmosphere with other events, that this is not a rock concert.
He's just gonna bring it
Kind of that atmosphere. Hell yeah. But are we gonna waive the open container law on parade day? No, so everybody can walk all over downtown on parade day? I don't think that'd be a good idea.
I don't know how you do it.
Well,
You've got a great smile on your face. All right, should we get started?
David Street Station would like to have a special malt.
Poor Jen's been waiting longer than a.
Serve it all without having to pull the service.
yeah.
Alright, well, thank you, Mayor Pacheco and council for this opportunity to be here. I will not lie, it's been a long time waiting, so I'm glad I'm finally here in front of you guys. I'm gonna basically give a recap. Originally I had submitted an informational packet back in May, basically kind of resubmitted the same thing here again this week. So I'll go through a few things. First, just the history of the restorative justice efforts within the police department. Some of you may or may not be familiar with this, but essentially the restorative justice efforts have been going on for about, well, a little over 3 years. So it started with a group of people just meeting monthly, talking about restorative justice, how can it benefit our police department, our community. Then it turned into, we formed our own little nonprofit board, and then it turned into, well, let's host a restorative justice conference in Casper, which, by the way, some of you probably remember the city of Casper was a very huge sponsor for that conference and for that to happen. And then once that conference was over, we had a volunteer training. So now we're talking last summer, so exactly a year ago, August of last year, we brought up some trainers out of Colorado and trained volunteers to serve in 2 different restorative justice volunteer capacities within the program, which I'll explain in a minute. And then we drafted a pilot program that is in cooperation with our district attorney's office, which I'll talk more about too in just a minute. But and then last September that pilot commenced. So I'll go over that data in a minute. And just real quick, I will give a brief definition of restorative justice. It is hard to do this because there's no one definition of what restorative justice is. And one of the things that I have really learned throughout my years of being involved with restorative justice is once you experience that process, you get it. Light bulbs go off. You're like, oh, I get what this is. So it's sometimes hard to put it into words. But this is a general definition that I actually pulled off of the Erie Police Department's website. They say restorative justice is a philosophical framework which views crime as an injury and justice as a process for healing to take place. RJ, for short, seeks to balance the needs of victims and communities rather than just those of the offender. The principles of RJ, such as requiring restitution like in a property crime case, is centuries old, literally. This is nothing new in our community. It just has a more modern feel to it by giving it more structure, giving it names, giving it definitions, and then it's surfacing in various models. Another simple way to look at restorative justice is if we think of our traditional system, we ask typically 3 questions. Who did it? What statute number do I write down? So what was the law that was broken? And then how do we punish that offender? What kind of sentence should they have? If you take those same questions, turn them a little bit, put that restorative lens on those questions change. So instead, you would ask, who has been harmed and what were those harms? What needs to be done to repair those harms, to mend those relationships? And then also, who's responsible for that harm? Who has those obligations to repair the harms? So, super simple definition. I could talk for hours just on that, but I won't. Believe me, I won't tonight. So from that overall philosophy, and that's what that is, it's a philosophy of how we view crime. So from that comes various models. In Casper, in our program, we're using the conferencing model. So this is a process based on restorative principles that brings together victims, offenders, and communities to come up with a plan of reparation, okay? It's a series of structured, facilitated conversations, starting from the intake, which is with me in my office or at the police department. If the case moves forward, then we have, well, then I call the victim. It's a choice if they want to participate. They certainly don't have to. If they decline, there are other ways that that victim can participate. They are given that option. We have the pre-conference with the victim. We do a pre-conference with the offender, and then eventually everyone gets together for what's called the final conference, okay? Again, these are structured, facilitated meetings. We follow a format of things that we cover. In the final conference, it brings together people such as the police officer who maybe investigated that case. It brings the support people for the victim and the offender, so parents. Let me think of examples. The victim can bring a support person. We've had school personnel, we've had principals, we've had someone from the school district board. Can't think of who else. We have our volunteer community members. Everyone has equal voice. Everyone gets to have that opportunity to voice how they were impacted, to identify their own harms and their own needs by their own definition, not as a system, us telling them what we think their needs are. They have that opportunity to say, here's what I need from this process. In the end of that process, the kid, and right now we've only had juveniles in the program, the kid walks away with what we call an RJ contract. So instead of, maybe a court order saying, here's your 40 hours community service and take a class over here, the group works together collectively. We brainstorm with what's going to go into that contract. So every contract is unique. It's relevant to what the situation was, and it's partially, in part defined by the victim. They have a lot of that input of what goes into that contract for the kid. So long as the kid completes that contract, then the ticket's dismissed and stays off their record, typically. There's an exception there, but I won't go into that right now. So that's the conference model. So what's a little bit different with our program, and ironically, we sort of ended up modeling ourselves after a different restorative justice program out of Colorado. We didn't intentionally try to do this, but they've been a great resource, is Natrona County Restorative Justice. That's the name we gave our nonprofit. We are a 501c3. We have that established. We have a board of directors. So we're sort of like this hybrid partnership with the police department, because it is a program of the PD. So through the nonprofit, I'm still able to write for grants and things of that nature, but otherwise we're a program of the PD. Our referrals typically come from the DA's office. So that single point of entry team that meets every Wednesday morning, reviews tickets, that's how they come to us. We've had just a handful of cases where circuit court orders it as a condition of their probation. That's kind of a different issue. We're still kind of working out some of that. It kind of changes the dynamic a little bit, because this process really has to be voluntary. The kid has to be taking accountability for their actions, and that's why we have those series of meetings, because at any point in time, if it is deemed accountability is not genuine, if it's not there, if things aren't just, if it's not going right, we kick it back to the court, or I should say back to the DA's office, sorry. So far, our pilot started September 1st. Our initial goal was to process a minimum of 10 cases over the course of 1 year. We processed 14 cases by April. So we're a little ahead of schedule. You can kind of see here some of the numbers. Of the 14 cases that went through, 13 completed their RJ contracts successfully. 1 was returned for non-completion. His case went to court. Average age 14.6. So far, everyone's been a male. I'm not quite sure what that means exactly. The one girl who was referred, she was one of the denied. She declined, her family declined to participate. So you can see the kind of charges, mostly misdemeanors. We have had a few felony level offenses come through. Just started doing recidivism checks. We've had one case so far of one new offense. We're gonna do recidivism checks 6 months out and then 1 year out. That's the plan as of right now. Any questions about those numbers? So since May, since that first set of data, and one of the reasons we started kind of with a new set of numbers, so to speak, is because in April, 14 of our police officers were trained in restorative justice. We brought some trainers up from Longmont, so they learned about kind of RJ 101, what to look for in making a referral, what makes a good case, what doesn't make a good case, that kind of thing. And so technically right now, officers, in their reports or their affidavits, they can say RJ review. They can kind of make that recommendation and that's sort of their way of saying, hey, this might make a good case for restorative justice. You might want to look at this one a little bit further. So that's kind of the plan. As of right now, though, still only juvenile cases. We did open it up to adults, very certain offenses, person meetings with Mike Lonigan, but so far we haven't had any adults referred. So yeah, 16 new cases, 10 accepted. So since May, 7 victims have participated in the final conference. We have 13 active volunteers. So in this process, volunteers can serve in 2 capacities in the conference model. They can be a facilitator, or they can be what's called a community member. So a facilitator is someone who actually helps to facilitate the circle process with me. There's always 2 facilitators in every circle. And then community members, they represent that harm to the community. They have that voice. So in a restorative justice process, well, I should say, one of the main tenets of restorative justice is that there's a ripple effect to the community. You know, a crime doesn't happen in isolation, it ripples out. And so the volunteer community members bring that voice to the circle as well. So a few things that I really want everyone here to know about restorative justice is that it's not a packaged program. This is not the latest trend. As I mentioned earlier, this has been going on literally for centuries. It's kind of getting back to basics a little bit. When there's a wrongdoing in a community, it's about relationships. It's about getting people together and actually having a conversation and identifying harms and finding a reasonable way to repair those harms to the extent possible. And again, just to repeat, it's a philosophy, it's a way of viewing, it's changing that lens of how you look at that offense, and just asking different questions. It's also just a way of doing business. I have done enough site visits now to other programs. I've been to, in particular, Fort Collins. For over 15 years, they've adopted restorative justice policies within their city government. It's just how they do business, it's how they view relationships, it's how they treat their citizens and their employees. And something else I guess I want everyone to know is that restorative justice is not for every case. Not every case would be appropriate, nor should it be. And it's not for every person. So it's definitely not the answer to all of our social ails. So one of the things that we are envisioning, and I should have said we, because this has been a 3-year process over the course of different people in that position of leadership within the department. But something that we have discussed in the police department is having something called a community justice unit. So that would be a unit that would oversee those community programs, community service and restorative justice. As of right now, I'm the one doing both programs. Ideally, that unit would consist of 3 full-time positions, all civilian, one full-time person over the unit, which also would probably include being a volunteer coordinator, I mean, that in and of itself could be a whole nother position, but, that would fall under specialist, and then we would have a lead RJ facilitator, and then someone who would continue with, the community service and being the coordinator for that program. I envision increasing partnerships. If this moves forward, if this program is able to grow, I see an extensive expansion of what this program can offer to our community, and in particular to our municipal court. And I'll divert for a moment. Just skip down to, expanding RJ services to our municipal court. The potential that restorative justice practices has for a municipality is huge. There's so much potential, and so sitting here today and hearing you guys just talking about the homelessness issue and the public intoxication, I see a lot of those guys in the course of my community service program. I deal with a lot of those people. They'll go into court, they'll have their fine converted into community service. I deal with them, help them get their community service. A lot don't finish because of the same issues everyone was just talking about. It's that perpetual cycle. Anyway, I read, now this has been a while ago, so I don't have a lot of in-depth knowledge, but I read an article about a program in Santa Barbara, and it's based on restorative principles, so it's about community and using that circle process to deal with public intoxication and other public nuisance kinds of offenses, disturbances, breach of peace, things of that nature. So there are options out there. Maybe I shouldn't have said anything because I don't know a ton about it, but there are programs out there designed to address those very issues that you guys are talking about at that municipal level. The other potential that are, expanding a restorative justice program could have is to help fill some gap services for our city. I think of the issue that's been talked about here recently, also the MIPs. What do we do with those people who go to court for those alcohol offenses? Now, when it comes to juveniles, we do have something in place. Through our single point of entry team, that team that meets every Wednesday morning, most of those kids, if it's their first time to have an MIP, they get referred to a local nonprofit in town, and they go through their drug and alcohol education course. But then what do you do with those people who are 18 to, right under 21? So here's that gap. What do we do with those people? I am familiar with a program called 21 or None. It is based again on restorative principles and values. It's about accountability and helping offenders to really gain a firm understanding of how they harm a community when they're out drinking underage and what kind of impact that has on a community. So I know, Fort Collins and Greeley both do the 21 or None. So again, it's a restorative program based on restorative principles that helps to address those particular issues. Another big one that I went through the process to experience it. I went through the entire thing on a Saturday morning for 4 hours. It's called Restore, and it's for shoplifting offenses. And now again, we have something in place for our juveniles, but what do we do with those people from 18 to 23, 24, 25 years old that are in municipal court for a shoplifting ticket? Restore, again, built on restorative principles. It's the circle process. It's about identifying harm and then repairing that harm back to your community, and hopefully to make everything just a more learning experience, or a more meaningful learning experience.
Yeah, go ahead.
Question, if you don't mind?
No.
Some of the municipalities that have implemented restorative justice, do you see some of those programs being the law enforcement assisted diversion programs? So it's basically a community type diversion program that they offer. It sounds very similar to what you're implementing here.
And a lot are diverted from court, yes.
Okay.
They are in lieu of prosecution. It's a one-time offer. Here's your one freebie, so to speak. I am also familiar, using the word a different way, diversion programs, youth diversion programs that are entirely based on restorative principles. Weld County does that, for instance. Every kid that comes through, it just has more of that restorative slant. It's more about giving voice to the victim in the process and giving back to the community. It's a more direct effort, to convey those restorative principles.
Okay. And
Yeah,
then
thank you.
Follow up. Does Fort Collins also offer it to only juveniles, or is it for adults?
It is for adults as well.
Okay.
Yes. Fort Collins actually has a pretty extensive restorative justice unit. I think they have 4 different services that they offer. They do community mediation, the conferencing model, then they have what's called victim requested services, so maybe the offender is not a part of the process, but the victim wants to have that dialogue with their perpetrator. That tends to be your high-risk cases. That's a whole different process. That's a lot more training and experience that you need to have before you would, facilitate that kind of conversation. We actually do have a VOD program in Wyoming through our border patrol. I don't know if a lot of people are familiar with that, but that is for, high-risk cases. But.
So with the community partnership, would you be able to, so if there's a director of another organization that says, hey, look, I can help this particular individual with this issue, is that something that you would work with them or perhaps divert them to that particular organization? So
I'm not sure if I understand.
homelessness, I guess, would be somebody experiencing homelessness, for example. Maybe they caught sleeping apart. That was an issue. They got thrown into this program. Would you pair them with, I guess, a nonprofit organization that's dealing with that issue, for example, being homeless?
If you're referring to the program I mentioned from Santa Barbara,
Yeah.
I don't know a lot about that. I know it's a circle process that requires that defendant to come back, I think it's once a week, and they check in and sit in that circle. And then they address mental health, substance abuse, housing, all those things that everyone here is aware are factors that influence.
Okay, but not so much with what you're doing right now. As in
No,
place.
no, we wouldn't take a case like that.
Thanks.
So if this program is going to expand, if this is something the city wants to do, we have some needs. First and foremost, we need a formal endorsement from the city. For quite a while now, I'll hear people say, Jen's doing this over at the PG with this program. Go talk to Jen. It's her program. This can't be my program. It can't. It'll fail. I'm due if this is just my program. This has to be a city program. This has to be something that as a city we embrace and we adopt. Like I said, it's just a way of doing business. If we're going to expand, we need staff. I don't know if you recall off the top of your heads, but I sent a program update in March on the community service side, and numbers are quite high in that area as well. Just getting really difficult to run 2 programs, so both are just going to get kind of stale and kind of stagnant if something cannot change. I need an office. So in April, we trained those officers. Well, that was great, right? It's great training, woo-hoo, we're ready to go. None of those officers have made a direct referral to me yet. I'm stuck in my office upstairs doing community service intakes. It's difficult. You have to foster that relationship with, you have to be present among. You need to build rapport. You need to kind of be present with them. It's a culture change. When police departments implement a restorative justice program, I've talked to several chiefs who have done this, and they just said it takes time. You just have to be patient and give it time, but it takes a lot of deliberate effort to get that done. And then eventually we'll need a neutral space to hold the pre-conference and the final conference circles. Right now, I do intake in my office. That's fine for that. That's more informal. But when it comes time for the pre-conference and the final conference, you really have to have a space that is private, neutral. People aren't trying to shove community service papers under your door, things like that. So far, we use different places around town, and it's worked. We've used some of our volunteers, like if they work at public health or Big Brothers Big Sisters. the Youth Crisis Center, you know, some places like that will use different, meeting rooms, you know, around town, so. But eventually, it would be really nice to have our own meeting space where we can, hold our meetings, so those are our program needs.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Jen,
Yes.
with regard to this program, there may be some confusion pertaining to this program and programs that are out there now.
Okay.
Judge Huber here was a huge catalyst for drug court
Mhm.
taking off.
Mhm.
And the diversion program is obviously very successful as well and doing good
Yes.
things for our youth. How is restorative justice different, and what virtues does it bring that are different than, say, the drug court that is having huge success and the youth diversion program that's underway as well?
I'll address the youth diversion question first. So here's an example, and I have to think really quick of what the charge is. Property destruction. So we had a case of property destruction for juveniles referred to the restorative justice program instead of diversion. Technically, they would have been eligible to do the diversion program. Most of them would have been. But I took the case, and in reviewing the officer's affidavit, making a few of my first initial phone calls, I realized that one of the people who was most affected by what took place that day wasn't a named victim in the case. It was a witness to the case. She's the one who saw this property damage taking place from her kitchen window. So from a restorative lens, we're able to expand that. She was an impacted person. She was very affected by what happened that day. She was very afraid of retaliation from these boys because she's the one who called the police, that kind of thing. A traditional way to view that, she never would have been called. But we included her. She was a part of that circle process. She had voice. She got to explain to the boys about what it was like to see this happening and how scared she was to go out because she ended up confronting them. In all of that. So that is something it's that different way to view what took place that day. It's putting on that restorative lens.
Through the victim's perspective.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah. Now, if those kids had gone to diversion, that never would have taken place. She never would have had that opportunity to be a part of that process and then to feel like she's a part of the solution. Because then she got to have input into that kid's RJ contract and what went into that contract. So it's a very active participation that people get. Yeah, and then drug court is even different just because in most of the cases for the conferencing model, we wouldn't take someone if it was like a possession charge or something of that nature. Now, does that mean a probation officer can't have a restorative conversation with a client? Sure, they can. Because if you can still bring it back to identifying the harms by a person's actions, who was impacted, and how can you repair those relationships, that's being restorative. That's a very informal restorative process, you could say. And it's just a restorative conversation. So when it comes to restorative justice, there's everything from informal to super formal. Having a conversation, informal, clear on up to victim-offender dialogue in a prison. That's a very formal, structured program. Thank you for that question.
Follow.
If I could, and this is probably as important for the council as well. The request that you have really is twofold, in my opinion. You've got the resolution that requests the council to adopt formally the restorative justice philosophy and concept and support of your program.
Yes.
And secondly, you ultimately would need help from the staffing standpoint, which obviously has funding implications and those kinds of things. And so, is that fair to say?
That's exactly right.
Okay. And so with regard to that, members of the council, Mr. Mayor, from a funding standpoint, I would suggest that this is a very good conversation to set the table for an extended conversation that we would need to have pertaining to staffing and those kinds of priorities, because certainly where Ms. Minor needs assistance in this office, you will also see probably requests that would suggest assistance in other parts of the organization and that kind of thing. Definitely, there is a lot of priority placed right now from this group in the public safety arena. And I would offer that restorative justice is a very critical part of that full streetscape, if you will, of public safety that at some point needs to be addressed. And so I would suggest that numbers that we could put together and so forth that would help support the conversation a little further is something we can do as we get further down the road through our budget year and as we prepare for fiscal year 20. Where we might have an opportunity would be if revenues come in very aggressively and we're at the point of saying, hey, maybe on a midterm basis we can consider some of these kinds of allocations that might provide Ms. Miner the help that she needs. But please don't think that tonight we're saying, hey, give us funding direction that we could use to help support the program. And I don't think Ms. Miner expected that either. But I'm hoping you're aware of the context that we're approaching here this evening, and ultimately what I think would be probably an important need to consider.
So Jen, I've got Charlie in Dallas that want to say something really quick or ask a question. So go ahead, Charlie.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You bet.
Jen, I know you don't do this for the accolades, but you are an unsung hero in this community.
No,
Appreciate all
thank
that you do. Last time you were before us, you talked a little bit about recidivism rates, and we talked a little bit about how expensive it is for the city to pay for a night of jail, and I assume at the juvenile detention center as well. There was some discussion of cost offset. Obviously, if you can reduce recidivism, you lower those costs. You've had 6 conferences now, and you've been studying all of this data in Fort Collins and other places. Are you confident enough in what this program will offer that you could justify some expenditures on this program with the expectation that we would have reduced costs in terms of jail time and juvenile detention center time that we would have to purchase? And how confident are you that we could anticipate that? Could we be confident enough to actually reduce the amount that we have to budget for those things?
I would answer that by saying restorative justice programs are not designed primarily to reduce recidivism. That's not.
Reduce what?
They're not primarily designed to reduce recidivism. That is not their sole purpose. And actually, Howard Zare, in this book, that I'll get, he says, reduced recidivism is a byproduct, but RJ is done first and foremost of all because it is the right thing to do. Those who have suffered harm should be able to identify their needs and have them addressed. Those who cause harm should be encouraged to take responsibility, and those affected by an offense should be involved in the process regardless of whether the offending party gets the message or not.
Spoken like someone who doesn't have to deal with budgets.
Well, and Mr. Howell, you are right on that, correct. But across the country, the reports that I've read, the research that I have reviewed, recidivism is definitely a byproduct that comes from that. So while that's
Reduced recidivism.
Reduced, sorry, did I say that wrong?
You just said recidivism. I think reduced recidivism.
Thank you, thank you. Reduced recidivism is a natural byproduct that comes from this process.
Yeah.
I believe that stems from when we create that RJ contract in that final conference. It's interesting. Those things are coming from within. It's not external motivation, for the most part. You know, some kids, yeah, maybe, but I think for the most part, it's very internal, and they're soaking it in more. And I think it also comes from it is a very anti-shaming process. So, you know, I mean, kids will walk into these circles shaking, their knees bouncing, they are nervous. They're gonna be sitting in that circle with a person who, you know, they put the dead rabbit on the doorstep, you know. They do not wanna see that person, and by the time they're done with that circle process, they're shaking hands. You know, they're having a conversation just as if they were neighbors. I think it helps with reintegration with juveniles. It makes them feel they belong back into their community and they feel supported. Just the dynamic that occurs in that circle is pretty profound, most of the time.
Yeah, I would hope it's a life-changing experience for the young person, and they wake up and realize that they're affecting real people.
Mm-hmm.
But from the budgetary standpoint, getting back to that, is there enough data that, I realize it's just a byproduct, but is there enough data for there to be some predictability based on a community of our size to say, you know, we can support, because this is what's gonna happen with all of these requests, is every single person's gonna come before us and say, if you fund us, we're gonna reduce costs because we're gonna be doing these good services and we won't have these other problems. So it's the same argument, and so we're gonna have to do this over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
But is there enough data for us to say anything with any confidence about this byproduct?
I could certainly research that, and I could certainly reach out to some cohorts in Colorado. I definitely think I have some resources to talk to.
I mean, there's, if I may follow up, I mean, the idea of changing a young person's trajectory and have them see that hurting people who are totally innocent, these are real people that they're hurting.
Mm-hmm.
And to stop and take a pause and say, I need to not be doing these things. That's about as important a thing as anyone can do. But it's so difficult to say that here's the outcome of that. Here are the things that aren't going to happen because of that life-changing experience, all the other damage that they would have done if they'd stayed on that trajectory. There's no way we can ever measure that. But if we could measure this recidivism component and actually see that there's reduced costs because of it, it gets a whole lot easier to hit that yes button.
Dallas.
So I have a few questions. One, shouldn't this be an arm of the courts? Because you're saying the police officers aren't sending the cases, but shouldn't the judges be sending these cases? I mean, the police officers have a certain deal of, just let me run this through this train of thought. Because one of the things I advocate is for a municipal court is for a juvenile judge who would decide what level these cases should, upon which these cases should be handled, whether they should come through restorative justice, diversion, or prosecution. And so we all know that all that involves age and the type of thing that happened and all the many factors that you have to determine. So, comment on that one, would you?
Sure, thank you for that question. Yes, so there are restorative justice programs that are court-based. There are many that are law enforcement-based. Having a restorative justice program within a police department, we become essentially another tool in the tool belt for officers. I can give one example of that. A particular officer who had already sat through a restorative process, so he was familiar with what it was all about and what it meant. And then like a month or two later, he responded to a call on a Saturday night, and then dealing with his juvenile and his parents, because he had that frame of reference. He knew this case, this would be good for restorative justice. That next Monday, I had an email from him saying, "Hey Jen, this case is going to be coming through. Just a heads up. It should be, you know, on the list on Wednesday's meeting." So that's where it provides that other option for officers when they're out in the field. The other thing is, so the few cases, I think there's been 3 that have been referred to the program from circuit court. What I have found is from the date of offense, by the time they have their initial hearing and they go for a change of plea or, you know, or what have you, we're talking 3 or 4 months out. Kids, as you know, they can't think past the weekend. What am I gonna do Saturday night? And so by the time we go through, it really seems like it's not as effective for the conference process. Now, maybe a different restorative practice, maybe in a court setting, would be different, I'm not sure. But as far as this conference process where you bring the victim and the offender together, I can tell you, I've gotten cases on my desk a week after the offense happened. And so boom, we're on it. You know, we want that immediate action, I believe, and I think that makes it more effective.
Mike?
Well, I don't have any questions so much as a few thoughts and observations, Mr. Mayor. Jen, first of all, I respect the work that you do, and I know that you're very invested with your whole heart and soul into this. But frankly, when you say that this is a kind of a return to way that things were always done, you are profoundly mistaken, at least in the United States of America. Because one of the things that our whole jurisprudential system with reference to criminal wrongdoing and everything is based on is that when someone violates a criminal law, they're not just hurting that victim. They're committing an offense against the entire community. And frankly, for me, it is terrifying when all of a sudden you start saying, well, Mr. Victim, come in and tell us what you think the defendant should have to do here. That is one of the things that was, you know, in France, Belgium, Holland, Germany, all of those European countries, you had private prosecution of criminal wrongdoing. And that was one of the things that was really wrong there. And I think we need to keep that in mind because these are slippery slopes that you can slide down real easily. Because if then you get a vindictive victim, you get a rich and powerful victim or something, they come in, then all of a sudden you get defendants being treated differently than if they're not a rich and powerful, if they're not a vindictive, if they're a loving and forgiving victim or something. And so we really have to keep in mind that when we're talking about criminal offenses, we're talking not about wrongs against an individual, but we're talking about wrongs against the whole community. Now, the idea of you know, encouraging wrongdoers to realize that you hurt this person, that is absolutely part of what needs to be done. But some of the things that I see here is, you know, Dallas talks about the need for a judicial or a juvenile municipal court judge. What I see is the need for viable supervised probation for a lot of the people that go through municipal court. Because, you know, viable supervision of these people can do a lot more than just, we're going to impose a fine or we're going to, you know, we're going to punish you in some way and then go on your way. And so that's what I'd like to see us be thinking about is, you know, talking about, you know, getting some viable supervised probation for these things. And, you know, I'm certainly not saying that you don't ever listen to victims because, you know, a victim impact statement is a very important thing. Impact statements from witnesses, very important. But we just have to be super careful when you start involving these people into, well, what do you think we should do to the person that did a wrong against you? That is a really terrifying thing in my world.
But Jen, correct me if I'm wrong with restorative justice, the victim's not setting the punishment for this person.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
What they're doing is they're telling them this is how it's impacted me.
Well,
This
but
is-
also,
and this is what it is.
you know, not to put words into your mouth, but you said that the victim sits there and says, these are among the things that I want to see in this person's restorative contract. That's what scares me infinitely, because that's where a victim says, well, I think that you should have this, blah, blah, blah. Now, I know that there's probably efforts and some safeguards there, but it is really, really scary when all of a sudden, you know, that victim starts having that kind of input in there without, you know, judicial oversight, without oversight. That is something that we really need to be scared of and careful about.
If I may.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Judge Huber, yes, you are right. I think it does create a lot of concern, and I think as a restorative facilitator, when it comes to ethics and practices, yes, we do have to be very careful, and that's part of the training as facilitators that we go through, and you're right, there are mechanisms set into place to help catch that. So if I get a case, one of the first things when I call the victim, I explain to him, here's the status of this kid's ticket, here's the process, and I kind of explain it generally. Does this sound like something you would like to be a part of? I think we've had 2 victims decline so far. The next meeting we have is what we call the pre-conference, and it's just with the victim and the facilitators, not with the juvenile offender. It's just with the victim and maybe their support person. And again, it's a very structured process we go through. We let them tell their story, how they were impacted. We ask them, what are your needs? What do you need from this? Do you just need to be heard? Do you need restitution? Do you need an apology letter? Do you need the kid to come fix your fence or to take the graffiti off the wall? Whatever it may be, how do they see their needs? So we're letting them kind of define that themselves. And then when it comes time for the final conference, they get to offer up, yes, their opinion. Trying to think of an example, but so far we have not had anything crazy or off the wall. And then as facilitators, that's what we're there for as well, is to keep that in balance. Most contracts end up having 3 to 5 items in it, and we make sure that it's not lopsided, like everything is, something maybe for the community but nothing for the victim, or everything's for the victim and maybe not repairing harm to their parents, for violating trust, We work really hard to keep that in balance, and if we ever had a victim that was sort of over the top, they simply wouldn't participate. But then there also are cases where, unfortunately, or however you want to look at it, we haven't had one of these yet, but there may be a case at such a serious level, it needs to go to court. It needs that court intervention, and it's not appropriate to be deferred out of court. And maybe in those cases, maybe that person does have a restorative process down the road. It's just, every case is different.
Jesse and then Mike.
I just want to, real quick, Jesse, if you don't mind, that you just hit my nail right on the head, because you were talking about the victim saying, this is what I need. And criminal law doesn't work that way. Criminal law is the offense is against the entire community, not just against one victim. And that is just something that we need to keep clearly in focus.
I agree, but I also come from the side of a social worker, and I see it from a different lens as a social worker. That there's an opportunity, and I've done restorative justice, and I've seen the process done, and I've done it at a level of in schools where I've seen the opportunity to do that, and I've also seen it done in other communities, and it does have a benefit, and I think it does do a really powerful job of teaching the understanding of what the impact has been on a victim and working on that. I guess I see it from the lens. I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a judge, but I see it from the aspect of a social worker that has brought a lot of benefits.
Can I ask my fellow councilman a question?
Jesse, really quick.
Just let me.
Mine's not really quick, so go ahead.
Mine is.
No, I was gonna say, I was telling you.
Mike, would it be okay to give it a try and see how it works though?
In my opinion, not under the model of any, and I've been to the restorative justice training things, I've studied that and everything. My opinion is that it starts down the slippery slope of, in essence, private prosecutions by focusing too much on this is what I, the victim, need and want. This process in other contexts outside of criminal law is very positive, you bet. Absolutely, in the social science realm, you're absolutely correct. But when you start bringing the heavy hand of the law down on things, that's just a whole different story. But
I think the data exists though, for this to be successful.
Yes.
There's a lot of communities that use it, so there is data that shows within the law.
there are a lot of things that are successful, but still violate some basic legal principles. But
Jesse, go ahead.
I appreciate that. That's a interesting concern that you brought up. I guess one that we should keep in mind. My thing for this particular program, it's not going to just, I guess if I could get that clearly in my mind, is this isn't going to take the place of the diversion program. That's still going to be kind of run in parallel to this.
Correct, it is not
Okay.
replacing any existing program.
Okay, thank you. And then it would be good for me just to see how many people are going through the diversion program and then how many kids are going back through the system. I think that would be interesting to know what's taking place on that side of things and like compare the two up, even though you can't compare them directly, but just to have those numbers in your mind, it'd be good to know. The next thing is if we support this, my concern is if you're not going to get the support for it to work. So you said there's 3 officers already trained, but then none of them have referred any of the juveniles to you?
We still get our referrals from single point of entry, that
Okay.
team that meets through the DA's office,
Gotcha.
weekly.
So my concern is if we implement this, well, if you're not going to get the support within the organization already, or with the judge system, or the court system, it's tough to support you if you're just going to fail right at the gate anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's my biggest concern. Or do you feel like you have that support?
I feel there is support, but the program is it's gonna get stagnant. It can't grow if there's not more staff. And that's basically what it comes down to.
Mr. Mayor, Jesse, I'd like to, the fact, to me, what I hear when Jen says that none of those 3 officers have referred anyone, I think it's probably pretty likely that none of those 3 officers happen to have run into a case that they think is appropriate to be referred into it. That's what I hear there. Not that they're not supportive of the concept or anything, but just that because, you can have the most highly trained guy on one kind of a case, and if he never runs into one of those kind of cases, it doesn't mean that he's not highly trained and invested into it.
Right.
And so that's what I'll bet you is going on there.
Or, if I may, how many of us have been to a conference where we were very interested in what was going on, we thought it was extremely relevant to what we were doing, and came back and radically changed what we were actually doing? That hasn't happened for me. I usually come back and do what I was doing before the conference. And I would guess that's another explanation, is it's not part of the culture.
Well, I guess I want to start off by saying I support this 100%. I'm 100% behind it. I support the idea of the concept of what we can do. I think it's another tool that we use within that system, a model that is imperfect. Not short of justice, it's a model that can be imperfect, but the legal system, which is imperfect within itself. This is just another tool for us to be able to do that, and human relationships often get lost in that. And so I support it. I would like to move forward to at least see if we could do a resolution by the council to support this, to say that we are, this is a part of our city. This is a part of that. Fort Collins does this, Longmont does this, there's many other ones. So that's kind of where I would like to move, see if people are open to that. You bet, Dallas.
Because I thought about what Mike said as being a downside to it, about this victim running things and how that can be manipulated. So where I connected the dots, because I can see exactly what you're saying, and it probably will happen, but it has to be controlled. And that's why I think personally, it should be an adjunct of the court. So it has the court power behind it. And the other thing is, those are just my opinions, but the other thing is, when I saw Chief McFeeder's names on here, that reminds me that I wanted to ask him what he thinks and what he's recommending to the council with respect to this, because as I understand it, because I really don't know your program well, but I've heard how hard you work and all of that, so it's very impressive. But I want to know what the police chief is saying about this.
Mr. Mayor, Council, I absolutely 100% support Jen and the restorative justice program. I've analyzed it, I've educated myself on it, and I would tell you that of all of the programs that we have, all of the tools in our arsenal, it's the most likely to create the life-changing impact on the individual. Councilman, you asked a very relevant question on where's the bang for the buck on this, if I can paraphrase for you. And I would tell you that there is no doubt in my mind the data is going to come back for the participants in this program. Their recidivism rate is going to be a model that the other diversionary products and probations and things wish that in incarceration wish they could achieve. The nature, my belief is that this is a more custom product for the individual. So whether or not I can crank enough individuals through it to get the books to balance, it will take the long term. When she indicated to you that chiefs that have overseen this, their caution is this takes time, and I would tell you that it's going to take time for those books to balance. But that impact that we make on the individual, it's hard to quantify how much we're prevented of their future by getting them on a path where they become good students again, go to college, become productive members of society, versus the ones that we didn't divert, who we arrest 15, 20 times as juveniles, and we're just waiting and begging for the day that they turn 18 so we can really get some hooks into them. And so without question, I believe that the end product has the ability to impact and bring about that lifestyle change that brings a long-term benefit. We would need a better crystal ball to give you the long-term, lifetime benefits of this, but without question, it's got the science behind it, but it's got, most importantly, it's got the community involvement. Councilman Huber, I would tell you that it's not just the victim. That's the reason why we have community members. We have law enforcement, we have other people there to mitigate that, so that we are bringing in, this is not a crime just against this one person, this is a crime against all of us. And so, it's a well-designed program. I believe in my heart, without question, that is it ideal for every offender? Absolutely not. Some offenders, they need their attention gotten. And the criminal justice system is well versed in being able to do that. This is our ability to divert the ones that are in need of that individualized attention, where we can make a difference in their lives and quite frankly, in the lives of their posterity.
So I have a question. Why aren't these 3 officers sending cases over?
That's Mayor, Councilman, that's a loaded question. What I would tell you is right now, there are many things that we are doing or not doing in our community right now that are a function of my staffing levels, that are a function of the number of calls for service, and that are a function of some of the high-profile things we've been involved in this year. And right now, people my staff is getting tired from the sheer volume of things that they are dealing with, versus the ability to, things like this come under more ideal situations. We use this more effectively when officers have the time to go, this is the perfect one. They have the time to spend more time with that potential candidate to explore the possibilities and to reach that resolution in their mind where they go, this is perfect, I'm going to recommend this. Right now, I would submit to you that they're not comfortable with the amount of time that they have because of the 7 calls that are still holding on the screen that need addressed. To judge the efficiency of this program by the current circumstances and the challenges faced by the Casper Police Department would be an improper alignment of where we anticipate being in just a short amount of time.
So here's what I hear you saying. This gets back to what Charlie said and what everybody else is feeling. How much money is this going to cost? Because you're telling me it's something that we all know, you need more police officers and to meet all these needs. So what more staffing do you need? And I don't know that we need to cover that here tonight, but I'd sure like a presentation, if I'm gonna hear about this again, from you telling me what needs to be done over there so the 3 officers can give cases, or they can all give cases. So what does that require in staffing? What does that require in manpower? If she doesn't even have an office, you know, what does that require? My new police station that nobody talks about. So we're talking about a lot of money here. And of course, when you talk about money, that guy there in the suit, he starts sweating, and he needs to figure that out. So I don't think, right now, I don't feel like, I like the idea, I agree with the mayor. I wanna see something happen there, but until I hear about money and all that, what else can we do?
Well, first of all, Mayor, Council, you know, our presentation today is to introduce it to you so that we can get into the position where we can have those discussions later on, because the money discussions, they are real. What I would tell you is that this body paid very good money to have a study come in from outside professionals and look at our calls for service, and look at our staffing, and to look at the needs of the city of Casper. What that study told you is that you know, when I'm fully staffed, it is my opinion that I have plenty of police officers. When you augment it by the commitment that we're asking you to consider here shortly of the SRO program, that only improves things in this community. Where I'm shorthanded is in some of the anecdotal services, such as this one. Those are the areas that you know, if you were to pay attention to that study, it would have identified for you. These are areas that need attention.
No, I know that.
So-
You don't have to sell me on that. I
So-
understand that.
So I am going to be very slow to come before this body and pound on a lectern and say I need more police officers.
What do you want from us tonight, Chief?
I think what we're asking from you is a understanding and a commitment to, yes, this is something that we value, that we think that we need to start engaging in the conversation of how do we improve this. We're looking for support from council.
Well, and I
So do you support the
agree with
program?
that. There's one other major deal, because I'm not overlooking this. What he says, I agree with in some measure that it needs to be answered. He was a judge for 35 years, and I know that he understands all these programs, and I know what he's getting at, I believe, with respect to this victim-oriented situation, but I think it can be solved. But until you, I think, convince him of it, because he'll be here next year. I won't be here next year, but I'm good. I'm good for a thumbs up on this tonight. I don't actually, truly, I don't need to hear any more about giving you a thumbs up on proceeding with where I think you are now, because it sounds to me like you're a ways away from getting it implemented, because I don't think he's talking about anything until the budget time next year, as far as finding money for it.
Good.
That's my thought.
Well, I'm gonna support it too. I hear what you're saying, Mike. I think where the rubber hits the road is the facilitator. And I think the caveat I have is, I mean, a judge can achieve some standardization and some fairness. Case after case comes before the judge, and they're able to sentence someone based on what's appropriate for that crime. And a victim's never gonna have those norms. A victim who's a very nice person might say, oh, he seems like a nice kid, he's really sorry, you know, maybe he can pick up some garbage at the park and we'll call it good. Another victim might be a very angry person who's gonna want a pound of flesh, and I hear what you're saying about that. So to me, it's the facilitator, to me, that has a responsibility to work towards some of that standardization, so that the characteristics of the victim aren't driving this process excessively. And the facilitator can say, we've got some lessons we need to teach here, and based on my experience with these kinds of situations, at a minimum we need to expect this, or that particular sanction, in my experience, wouldn't be helpful and not achieve, so that they're playing a very active role in trying to guide the process toward something closer to what a judge might do, so that there is some fairness. And we don't have a word on the street amongst the kids saying, yeah, go for this restorative justice, you'll just get off really easy if you do that. And they'll just slap you on the wrist and let you go. We don't want that kind of atmosphere. So, but I'm gonna support it, but I do think that role really needs to be, the importance of that role, the standardization part of it has to be stressed.
And bear in mind, we're only dealing with misdemeanors here. We're not, I know most of yours were felonies, and so these are misdemeanors. And I'm not sure it's gonna be as heavy weighted as you might have thought when you were judging, but I do understand your concern there, and I think it's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they ought to be able to fine tune that out.
Well, I think that, you know, depending on how you put the flesh on the bones, and depending on how it's structured, and, you know, one of the things that I am convinced of is that, you know, it's just like fires. Fires don't start big, they always start small. People that commit crimes, the ones that start out by committing murder, you don't need to worry about them. They're not going to do it again. But they all start out little and grow big. And so what you got to do is you got to focus on those little ones. And those little ones are, you know, yeah, it's just a minor misdemeanor. You know, they spray painted their neighbor's fence. They did this, they did that. Yeah, not that big a deal. No, well, you got to, as Barney Fife would say, nip it in the bud. And the question is the best way to nip it in the bud. And the question there is, how do you do that without doing violence to the basic underpinnings of our society?
So folks, I'd like to, we know it looks like everybody's supporting it. Is there support for the resolution then that we can do that for the city? That's something that we can get behind?
With my caveat.
With your caveat. And then later on the road, we can look at funding as we get closer to that. Is that something, Carter?
I think it's worth a try. I think it's worth looking into and dealing with it. I think we have good people, and I think we have people that can monitor this property properly. I think with the judge, ex-judge being here, he can look at it from that judge's side, but there's times, Judge, you gotta look at it through another lens.
I will
You're not a
say-
judge anymore, so her lens isn't a bad lens. And I like the idea, and I think that it's time that we have more compassion, and that's the best word I can come up with now with children.
I will say this, when I first was on council and Jen came to present, and the chief of police from Longmont came and spoke to us to present that this is something that the police department was gonna go forward with, showed us the data, showed us all the things, and that's what, I've been a part of restorative justice before in the past in other areas, but it was good. It was relevant, it's been used around the country in other law enforcement agencies, so we're not reinventing the wheel. It's true, and I think exactly what the chief said in here, that this is not something that we're just kind of throwing out there on the table and saying, well, let's just try this new program here. I think it's something that's been proven by the science, like the chief said. So, thanks, Jen. We appreciate you being here tonight.
Could I say two things?
You bet.
And then I am done. So first, I would just like to remind everyone when we do have trainings or community meetings, things of that nature, I do always email city council. You are always welcome and encouraged to attend those opportunities to experience that more what restorative justice is. And then the last thing is I have books here. It's sort of an RJ 101. Please take one with you. I would appreciate it.
It's a good book. I've read it. It's really, really good.
There's actually quite a few in the series. This is just sort of, yeah, an intro. But anyway, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate
Thanks, Jen.
it.
Thanks for all the hard work you do with our young people. Innkeeper and registration ordinance.
Mr. Mayor, Council, this is a quick one. Change in statute has precipitated a proposed change in ordinance, and it looks like we have support, Mr. Attorney.
Only because I saw that we're 2 hours behind on the
No,
agenda.
because I read all the information, and I trust that
I'm
Lane
seeing,
is right
I'm seeing
about
a
it.
plurality of thumbs here.
That's
It moved quick.
Way
I
to
don't
go.
need a big long
Mr. Attorney, good job.
Thanks,
I
John.
think we're there.
We're there?
Yeah,
well done.
thanks, John.
Any questions?
Don't say that.
Okay.
I don't
All
have
right.
any questions, but I have some observations.
Agenda review, anything we need to go over?
Mr. Mayor, Council, you've got your grid document in front of you here. I really don't have anything I'd want to point out to you other than the 1% stuff that's coming up, as alluded to earlier, and that will be of influx of information here soon.
Great, thank you. Anything from the council? We'll start with Mike.
No.
Jesse, you have anything you want to share or updates?
Yeah, I do have a couple of things, and I appreciate you passing out that little flyer for the coffee talk. Talking with a local contractor here, you know, telling me about why that is such a bad idea for the compacting and inspecting. There's other ways that we can go about it to ensure that, you know, the driveway's not going to collapse or foundation in other unfortunate cases. And, you know, going along with that conversation, then it also alluded to some of the inspection requirements we do and the rates that we increased for roofing inspections. It is interesting the fact that we do, you know, QC to make sure that, you know, the electrical is up to code and it was installed correctly, but then we stop short when it comes to a roof. And, you know, I think we had a person come to council and talked about that. But we didn't quite address that issue. So we don't actually have an inspector inspecting roofs, the grade, or anything like that. So in my mind, I don't know why we would increase that fee. And maybe that's something that we can address at a future date. And then even when we're getting into the property maintenance code, for example, we had people that were property managers and people from the board of realtors, and they were more than willing to help us with the problem. We identified a problem, we implemented, I guess, a book instead of just trying to focus on that key area that we really wanted to tackle. So I just hope that we can go to the contracting licensing board and say, hey, here's our issue. What can you professionals help us to prevent that? You know, one idea was don't let realtors develop properties. Don't give anybody a license. You know, something to consider. Probably not something that we're going to implement, but I guess, you know, we should make sure that we have a good open dialogue with our contractors here in our community. You know, he mentioned, you know, Doug Barrett used to have a big map in his office, and then that showed everywhere that you would expect caissons to be, for example. So I don't know if that went away or what's being done now, but I'm glad we're moving forward to speak to the community about soil compacting and testing. It sounds like there are options out there, and then hopefully we'll hear those the 23rd. Outside of that, let's see here. Oh, so last meeting we had contracts drawn up with particular people when it comes to negotiating cell towers and fees, and I was just wondering, is there a current policy that's in place when we have arms of the city or even city employees? You know, what direction do they go off of for negotiating the best rate? The majority of the work that the city does, regardless, is heavily subsidized anyway. And in my mind, the goal is to make sure that our citizens have the best cell coverage, for instance, in their neighborhood. So do we want, you know, less cell towers and more money, or more cell towers and less money? So I'm just curious on what we're going off of, and is that a policy thing, or is that mainly at, you know, the city manager, or is there a previous resolution that's already out there? I'm just curious to know. You know, and Cheyenne, of course, they're ahead of it, and luckily they're getting small cell towers first, I think, in Wyoming. They moved quickly to get that ordinance changed to accommodate that, and they're moving forward with you know, contracts from AT&T, Verizon, and Union Wireless. But we'll catch up maybe.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, the policy with regard to how cell companies are negotiated with is not one that I have seen in writing or whatever. I don't know what is meant by Cheyenne being ahead of the curve or in the lead or whatever that means. To me, that's confusing.
Yeah, mainly just that they're able to get that. Midwest is going to be constructed shortly, and in my mind, if we're going to put in, I think the plan called for 12 streetlights or something like that. that's a great opportunity to have an outside company pay for part of that infrastructure where we save money from that 1% funds, and then we can put it elsewhere if we're going to have a cell company pay for that, or some of it, or we can generate revenue off of that can go towards a particular project.
Because they're putting a small tower in the.
In the light poles, yeah. So for instance, I think one particular cell company, Denver, they own their street poles. So they have an extensive contract with all of them. They have an extensive contract with any new Walmarts. If they're going to phase out a light pole, they'll come in, put in theirs. So it's just, it's just one of those small areas where, hey, look, we have a $2.2 million project. We're going to put in new streetlights. Is the opportunity there to really capitalize on, somebody else helping us with that project where we can save money and put it towards maybe funding a director for restorative justice or something like that.
Mr. Mayor, what I was going to say is, in the process that I have observed since I've been here, the effort to reach out to other communities to see what they have in their agreements and to talk about light pole installation as kind of a disguise, if you will, for tower enhancement and that kind of thing, has absolutely been a part of the process. And so we are reaching out to those communities, and we are talking about the best practices that they found and those kinds of things. So I've only been here 14 months, and from what I can tell, the process absolutely includes those kinds of things. To answer the further question with regard to whether or not we want more cell towers and less money, my goal is to find a way to enhance revenue that we have as a community, as well as enhance coverage that we have as a community. So to me, I don't want to settle for less money and more towers, because I think there's a better balance to find in terms of enhancing revenue and enhancing coverage. So that's my goal overall.
Kenny,
Nothing, thank you.
Dallas.
Two real quick things. John Johnson thinks that we should allow bars to be open on Sunday for the same hours they are during the rest of the week. He said it's not a religious issue. He and other people feel discriminated against, and there's no reason for it. He would like to have us amend the ordinance to provide that Sunday will be open the same times they're open during the week.
Can we have that on? Is it okay if people want it on a work session to talk about? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Give
With
that
some
on.
hesitation,
With some hesitation.
because liquor licenses.
Well, if you
Senator
recall,
Jackson
though,
does it if that helps.
just a point, Charlie, if you recall, the state law on the subject says they can stay open 24 hours a day, so the state has blessed it.
I'm good, let's talk about it.
So the
I'm just
second-
saying, every time we bring up liquor license laws, it's,
The second issue is,
it's a problem.
the second issue is we've lost a lot of money on sales tax when you guys voted smoking out. So some of these same bar owners have suggested, why don't you have an ordinance that says we can buy a special permit to be a smoking bar, pay $3,000 or $4,000 a year for it, and they can do with their business what they want. I'm just throwing that out. I'm not even asking for a vote on it. The other one is, the
You
third
said
one is,
two.
I had one of them. I gave the manager the letters from Marvin Peel. And the city's kind of shutting his dream down about opening that old hotel and having the old restaurant up and at 'em, because they want, we're trying to preserve an old beat up building down there called the Plains Hotel. But yet we have one last downtown hotel in the city of Casper, and that was the Gladstone, and he owns it. He's got a 3-foot stairway, and somehow this new ordinance, you have to have a 4-foot stairway. And he points out in the letter that the stairway over at First Interstate Bank is 3 feet. And so why do we want to kill that whole deal? It's $1 million to build this other big stairway. That place was built like you couldn't tear it down with guns from the Missouri. It's very well built. It's a stately old property. In Denver, the city's figured out how those buildings don't have to be torn down. and all kinds of things done to them that you couldn't even do.
Is it really just 3 feet versus 4 feet?
That's what it says in his letter.
Okay.
So everybody gets all the Twitter about these newer, I don't know what about grandfathering the building in. I mean, if the same guy would have owned the building and had been operating this hotel all these years, they wouldn't come in and say, you've got to shut down your building and put an extra foot in the stairway. They're putting in a $350,000 elevator. They've got a liquor license, and to utilize that upper floor, which I worked in, and there's been a restaurant there, and a big disco was there once. I think the city ought to lighten up a little bit and help this guy figure out how to seek another $1 million in his business and get that thing open, which is what he wants to do. He's 75 years old. So
Why don't you just
personally,
have an appeal like the lady with the fence?
exactly. I
It'll
think
come
it's like
before
the
us.
lady with the fence, but
It'll come
but
before us and
but
we
he's
can
not
decide.
getting. He's not. I don't think we're helping him. I think we have to go talk about lands. Let's be nice to people who want to put $1 million, $2 million in downtown and open a really cool old building.
Jesse, really quick, guys.
Just really quick to piggyback off that. I found it interesting during one of the gubernatorial forums that one particular candidate said cities and towns should have a particular, I guess, when it comes to historic buildings, that they're the exception when it comes to trying to put in money to bring them back to restoring them. You know, of course, you got to keep those life safety concerns in there, but it's just interesting to hear that spin on it and how he accomplished that by local government adding an exception to historic buildings.
Well, and that's a very good way of putting it, because that's actually what they did down in Denver. And I just can't believe we're not doing that for this guy. And he's, as I told him, you can't pick any green bananas.
You can request a variance, it'll be denied by planning and zoning because the rules won't allow planning and zoning to approve it, and then he can appeal it to council.
And that's what I was just gonna suggest. I think what he really needs to do is get Miguel or whoever.
Miguel is his guy.
Yeah, to
I agree with you.
make a real definite thing, take it to planning and zoning. If he doesn't like them, appeal it, and then,
Is he in your ward?
I don't know.
Isn't that in Ward 1?
Yeah, the building is,
Aren't you Ward 1?
yeah, the building is, yeah.
Yeah, so, that's your project.
But you're so much better.
I'm gonna do it until they clip my coupon and tell me, you're not gonna get any more money lying in your bank account.
Have faith, Dallas.
Okay.
I can lose an unopposed election.
I got two things.
Okay.
Can I answer that question though?
Oh.
Is that all right?
Yes, yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah. And then if you don't mind, the answer that I have is even better than what you're proposing, or you're proposing. If you don't like the law, change it. And you guys have that ability. Y'all have that authority to do that.
Maybe we need to instruct the city attorney to come up with a historic, historic building ordinance that would allow certain things to be done to historic buildings. Because there's a lot of historic buildings that they mapped out in town. My office got passed over. I'm gonna try to get it in because it was built in 1914. But when you have an historic building, you're exempt from all that.
And my point is, if you want to do it for one person in the community who has a whiz-bang project, because it's a whiz-bang project, maybe the law is not a good law. And I think you should change it if you don't like it.
And there's only one downtown hotel, so we're only gonna have to do it for that one downtown.
Unless
hotel.
First Interstate comes in
Unless they
and
say
says,
so.
and so I would say, if you don't like the law and the requirement, you really should just change it.
Well, I don't wanna change a code requirement that has good science behind it for all future
Just
construction.
for that building.
Well, then why wouldn't you apply it?
Well, because it's an
That's my
exception,
question.
because it's an exception because of these circumstances.
Yeah.
Well, it's an
But I don't
historic-
want but I want the new construction to have the 4-foot stairway.
Exactly.
I can see the chief sitting over there, but tell that to the guys that get, and Tim sitting there, tell that to the guys that get trapped in the fire.
I know.
Exactly.
Go ahead,
That
Charlie.
that hasn't
I
happened
got-
in 75 years.
Well,
Two things I gotta report on. One is,
The Higher Education
till it's
Committee
been
is
done.
a founded group, and it's a group that basically advises the University of Wyoming Casper. And it is responsible for advocating for the Masters in Counseling program that is now in existence and wouldn't be there without this committee, and the Farm Tech program that is also available. I think it's kind of important, this committee has not met, but CADA has 5 business groups that are meeting to advise the university on its programming. They've lost half their staff through the University of Wyoming budget cuts. Well, and they're trying to continue to run these programs with significantly reduced staffing. And that's a serious problem because the University of Wyoming Casper is a very critical component to our economic development. Anytime businesses look to locate somewhere, they want to know what kind of educational opportunities are there for their staff, for advancement. And this is a big deal that this program is functional and operating, and not just maintaining but expanding. And so I think that, and we have a commissioner, we have a number of people on this higher education committee. And what I said to people is, we need to be a strong voice saying that this is our community, this is a program we value, and don't think you're going to continue to cut this program without us standing up and saying this is not okay. And we want educational programs for our community. And if we just stand by and say, okay, I guess if that's your budgetary decisions, this program is going to die on the vine. And we will lose, I think we'll eventually lose UWC. And that would be a tragedy for us because it needs to expand, not wither.
Do you have a comment on that, Kenny?
Yeah, so the purpose of that committee was originally to try to bring in the 4-year university on a much larger scale. So maybe our power is to say, well, maybe we should just bring in a private university now.
Well, yeah, I mean, everything I've heard about Dr. Nichols is she's done a great job. But if she cut the faculty at UW by 50%, I mean, what kind of a university would they have?
Yeah.
Okay, you don't cut a program by 50%. So it's just not acceptable, and we just have to be a strong voice saying, no, we're going to stand up for this program. DDA met something we're going to be hearing about more and more in the future is these economic opportunity zones. Downtown is its own zone. The governor basically was given the authority to create these economic opportunity zones for tax advantaged investment. And so basically, if you're in this one of these zones, and it's defined by certain economic features and low income and those things, low property values, you can make investments in your holdings and have certain tax advantages, which is a great incentive for people to develop their properties. And so there's nothing specific about it now. The DDA is talking about how can we enhance this and advertise this and sort of grease this process for people that own property downtown. And so that's a current discussion. It's probably not something for the DDA to do. It's probably something more like Forward Casper, which is a CADA arm. But just be aware, these economic opportunity zones are going to be in our discussions more and more as we move on from here, and that's a term you're just going to hear more and more about.
Can I just piggyback off that really quick? There was an email chain that went out to all mayors in Natrona County about the opportunity zones, and no mayors answered the call on that, and CADA picked it up, and they submitted those opportunity zones. I think there's 4 or 5 that were in Natrona County, and 4 were accepted by Governor Meade, who ultimately sent them to the U.S. Treasurer, that also accepted them. And there's only so many in the state of Wyoming, but luckily, I just want to throw that out there, that CADA took it upon themselves to submit those applications to our governor, and he submitted them to the U.S. So, because of CADA.
So CADA finally did something then.
Not for you, Dallas.
That's all I'm doing. Shaking my head down. I don't have anything. I know that we have a real quick exec personnel that Carter's going to go over with us. He said it won't take very long at all. So.
Real quick.
He's waiving his right to a review. Is that what he's doing?
Yeah. So motion to move into exec.
So moved.
Second.
Jesse.
Night, guys.
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Katie, nice to see you.